Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening both to everyone here in person, and there are a few people trickling in via Zoom. I want to welcome everyone to Borough Hall. Thank you all for coming. If you guys don't know, Mayor Ryan Kennedy, to my left, your right, Councilman David Mackey, and Council President Krista Weaver. We, three of us, make up our water supply subcommittee. And as part of our process to explore what we can do about our water system, about our rates, and try to bring those types of things under control as we look forward, the committee has been responsible for the outreach and presentation both this evening and as we've gone through this process. Tonight is meant to be one of the more informal interactions. There is, well, I think every member of council is here and we noticed for the meeting, so they're allowed to be here formally. No action will be taken tonight, but we did do our sunshine notice because everyone's here in the room. But the idea tonight is we'll have a quick bit of an update about where we're at and some updated data we have, and to be another one of several and ongoing opportunities to ask questions and for us to receive feedback about our water system. A couple of other pieces, again, we're online via Zoom, as well as here in person. Seems like we're not going to need it, but we do have a standing room overflow seating upstairs with a screen. We're trying that. I'll be honest, David's been here for a long time. I've been here for a good amount of time. Chris has been here for some time. We haven't seen this level of interest in our meetings, and that is a fantastic thing. It's one of the things we love about Hopewell. One of the things that we sought out in going through this process, and as we continue, we will continue to do things like sending postcards out when something important is happening, printing things on our bills when we're going to have an extra meeting. The meeting we had in May is available via YouTube on our website. The slides are there. The same thing will be true after tonight for those who can't watch it live or be here live. And we're going to continue to do that. Tonight is, as we talk about what the processes are to possibly consider selling a water system, tonight is not part of that process. We're going to continue to have extra opportunities to meet with people, to answer questions, and to get feedback. Those things also include our administrator, Doug Walker, who I apologize I didn't introduce here again to my far left, your far right. And I, every other Wednesday, and generally the second Saturday of the month, there'll be a notice on the website. This Saturday we'll be traveling, so it's going to be a different date, but they'll always be on the website for scheduling. We're available to speak then. And at every meeting of Borough Council, including this Thursdays at 7 o'clock, we have an opportunity and a time to give updates as well as take questions and feedback. So we want to make sure that at every point, through everything we're doing, we can get every piece of information that we have to the public and receive every piece of comment and feedback, good or bad, that we can from as many people as possible. First, I'll just apologize a little bit. This isn't technically a formal meeting, but I would like to ask us all to do a flag salute. I'd be remiss to not start that. So if we could join me, pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah, just here. Your time.
No.
Yeah, let me just finish a little bit more introduction. So again, tonight's gonna be a very brief presentation of some additional information that we've put together in the last couple of weeks. An opportunity then both in person, and I don't think anyone is upstairs, but if you are upstairs in the building watching on Zoom, you can watch us, but when it comes down to public comment or questions, please come down to the first floor. We don't have a microphone or the camera turned on upstairs. I suspect no one is up there, but if you are, you can hear me and do that. With that, speaking for myself here, our goal and my goal is to present our community with as many options as possible to change what we had to do several months ago with our plans. When we look at the capital expenses going forward, when we look at what we currently have to charge our customers, and that's us as well. Frankly, I think we find that unacceptable. And as a response to that, we're going to turn over every stone, and that includes looking at whether we should not be in the water business at all. As I look and approach that, from a process standpoint, I feel that we are at the, assuming we're homeowners, right? We're at the point where we'd be putting out a for sale. And my personal commitment, and I think the commitment from council, is that as and if we continue through a process to explore it, I myself couldn't tell you, and I don't know if anyone else could, what the right decision is until after putting that for sale sign, we have offers come in and a chance to talk to those folks to see if there's anything worth even exploring. In my mind, I think there will be, but until we have either a public entity like Trenton Waterworks or a private entity like New Jersey American come to us with offers, we really don't know what it would mean for our community. And when I say what it would mean, I mean in terms of not just cash that we'd receive from selling it. We have this thing of value in our water system, and it is worth something. And if you go to our website, we have a report from some of our advisors that say it's worth several $million. But our goal isn't necessarily just how much money we could get for it and what do we do with that money. It is looking at our rates now and going forward, comparing it to the rates our neighbors pay in Montgomery, Princeton, and elsewhere, and seeing, well, what path can we take to get our rates to something that we feel comfortable, to something that we feel is affordable, and frankly, what our neighbors pay. That might mean turning the keys over to a private company. It might mean that they come to us with things that don't make sense to council. And depending on what part of the process we're in, that decision will always be, whether it's just through council and public hearings and discussion and outreach. And again, that continued commitment for the type of outreach that I think you've seen the last couple of months, which is postcards, special meetings. There's certainly nothing that we're doing that is hidden or in the dark. We want people here in this room and online participating and talking with us about this process, and whether it is a council decision going forward or something that goes to the voters. Ultimately, we want to present to this community the best possible options to choose from to get our rates under control, to get the level of service that is appropriate going forward, get the capital repairs that we need in a way that is affordable to all of us. That is my personal goal in doing this. And until we get further on in any process, I don't know. And again, being in the weeds, I'll be honest, I see these numbers and they're scary of what our rates would be. I am very interested in seeing what solutions we have either through private arrangements with private companies or anything we can do in-house. And I'm interested in talking to anyone in the community or outside of the community, frankly, about what some of those options are. But my goal is to get as many of them as possible, fleshed out as much as possible so that they can be presented for decision-making and consideration. With that, setting the stage about tonight, I'll say we've had a lot of meetings lately, a lot of important topics, including ones that I personally haven't been able to participate in. I want to thank Council President Krista Weaver for taking the helm at one of them. When it comes to the redevelopment, I cannot participate because someone that I work with, I'm an attorney, I work at a large law firm. Someone that I work with also represents the developer that's interested, which means that I can't participate on either side. That is very frustrating for me as someone who likes doing legal work, so I can't do it there and really wants to be doing things for free, frankly, for our town. It's quite frustrating. And I want to thank Council President Weaver for taking the reins for something that is really challenging. It's not an easy topic and something that is, so with that, Krista, if you have a few words you want to say.
We do, and I don't want to prolong this and, delay the conversation getting started, so I'll be brief. I just wanted to apologize for attempting to use humor to diffuse a tense situation at the last meeting.
Thanks, Krista. We are all volunteers here. We are doing our best, and we know everyone here. You guys are volunteers and residents, and we're all doing our best for what we think is best for our community. And thank you for that. And thank everyone for here taking time out of your night, whether it's the now 17 people on remotely or those here in person. So with that, we do have a couple of slides. I'm going to hand the reins over to Councilman Mackey to give a brief update before we get into feedback and questions here tonight. So I'm also going to make sure that I share the screen for those on Zoom, which is not quite an easy thing for me to do, but hopefully I think I've done it. Well, that's I think people hear what's on the screen, and people remotely should be able to see it as well. So.
Well, as usual, I'm going to stand in front of the screen so I can get fingerprints all over it. Stuff. Most of you know who I am, but just in case you don't, David Mackey, Council, the Water Supply Committee. So what I wanted to do tonight was to present some additional analysis that we did, mostly to address the sort of the ongoing question, which is if we keep the water utility, if we continue to run it, what are the challenges fiscally that we're going to be dealing with in the future? Not just where are we now, but what do we need in terms of capital needs and everything else. I mean, it's important that we're looking at this realistically. And as some of you may know, if you reviewed the report that was done by Phoenix Advisors for us, the fiscal analysis, they essentially did an analysis going 3 years, I think 3 years forward, of what the budgets might be. But we had an internal discussion and said, well, let's go out a little bit farther. And also take on some things beyond our 3-year capital plan that they incorporated in there. I mean, do a sort of a clear-eyed analysis of what we might be doing in the next 10 years. Because if we're really going to stay in the game, so to speak, we need to have a realistic idea of what's going on. The first slide.
Sure. Say sure, and then I failed to do it. But there.
Okay, there we go. So those of you, some of you have probably seen this, but I'll go through it quickly again. This is just a general overview of our water system. This is our service area. This is the township, and this is the borough portion. Basically, the established, actually, our water system over 101 years ago. I think the elements of it here in the late 19th century. About 2,000 people served, give or take. We have a reservoir up on the hill here that's about close to 230,000 gallons. That provides pressure for the whole system for the town, at least from our wells. 764 or 763 service connections, and about 10.5 miles of water mains that we own, and about another 7 miles or so of customer service lines. So those are the lines that run on private property that are privately owned that actually convey the water from our main to households and businesses. Oops, sorry, yeah, just a little bit more. So fire hydrants, valves, etc. Annual water usage is in the range of about 40 million gallons. Right now, our water comes from well number 4, which lately has been over 50% of our supply. I'm glad to say it used to be less. And the balance comes from the American water. Okay, next one, please. This is just.
I had a question.
Oh, yeah.
On the 38 to 40 million gallons.
Yeah.
Is that meter or including the lease?
That's metered.
Meter.
Yeah. We'll talk about the leaks a little bit later. Yeah. So that's actual meter usage. So this is just, I thought it might be useful to look at where we are relative to other water distribution systems. So this is us, this little bright blue line. There's Flemington. I can't quite reach up there, but inside that circle, you'll see a little line, and that's Flemington Borough. And they have their own municipal water supply. They continue to have it, but they're also surrounded by New Jersey American. So it's kind of interesting that they sort of extended their service along, I think it's Amwell Road 514, and so they're around that area. Similarly, this is New Jersey American, obviously to the east of us, and they've extended service toward Pennington, but Pennington still has their own system. Lambertville had their own system until, I think it was the early 2000s, when they sold to a company called United Water, that eventually became Suez, now it's Veolia. So that's a utility, one of the three main big utilities. So they're about 2 miles away along here, and here to the south is Trenton Waterworks. Just kind of putting things in perspective, and it's also, I'll just mention this, you know, if we get to the point where we're actually soliciting proposals from people, you know, obviously we have New Jersey American, which makes it seem like they might be the only ones, but it's also kind of curious that you have another competitor over here and they're about 8 miles away. And I look at this and I think, well, you know, somebody made an investment in running service this way, who knows? Maybe somebody else would be interested in connecting, and that would be a good thing. Could I just do the, okay, go
I
ahead.
just want to mention South Brunswick is actually municipally owned and operated, and it's being shown incorrectly as New Jersey American Water Territory.
I don't have South Brunswick.
Actually, you do, because it's all shaded in blue.
No, these are all different service areas. This is a layer from New Jersey GeoWeb that shows all service areas. It doesn't distinguish, it doesn't show the line where different service areas. I labeled these myself so that you can see. The rest of this is a whole bunch of different systems. Not really relevant to us. You're welcome.
It actually,
All right, so while we're keeping this informal and we'd like to have a nice back and forth, maybe let's just quickly get to our presentation and we'll get into questions because there is a fairly full room.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, this is a little busy. Some of you have seen this slide before. It's a comparison, a current snapshot of our water rates and our costs basically per gallon of water, per 1,000 gallons of water, as compared to New Jersey American, based on their current rates. So this dashed line here was basically our rate structure before we raised our rates earlier this year, and it was a substantial increase, as you can see. The graph's a little complicated. I was trying to basically show the proportion between different rate structures, and the problem is everybody has different ways of, I mean, New Jersey American has a very simple thing. They have a monthly fee, and then they have a cost per 1,000 gallons, and that's it. We have a more complicated system that has a series of different rates depending on how much water you use. So the easiest way to show it to me was to have a graph that shows the whole range of different users and what they basically pay per 1,000 gallons on a curve. But I've also labeled some of these to show you two numbers. One is what the quarterly cost is, because we bill quarterly, and the other is what the annual cost is in parentheses. So you can do some comparisons. So a couple of important points. At the low end, this is the minimum user. This is where you're basically paying a flat fee. And right now, our rate for that is significantly lower than what you would be paying New Jersey American if you're using a relatively modest amount of water. And the reason is essentially we subsidize this rate by shifting some of the cost onto the higher rate users. And we do that intentionally because we think that for 2,000 gallons is kind of the essential water that you need, you know, and regardless of your income, your ability to pay. And so we've done that. But every time you shift the cost incidence from one to another, somebody else is paying. And there are a lot of people down this. The median user is about 10,000 gallons per household, give or take. That's based on analysis of all of our water accounts. And so we look at that too. So, you know, a typical family might be using this amount of water, and under our new rates now, they're paying close to $1,000 a year, or you know, about $250 a quarter. To get up to 20,000 gallons, which a fair number of families use, it's almost double that. But where there really is a difference is when you look at the high users, the commercial users. So here you're looking at, you know, 100,000 gallons to 150,000 gallons. So under the current, and it's a little confusing. I have two curves here. One is for a 2-inch service line. They have a different service fee. But I mean, if you're a commercial user, you're probably not using a little 5/8 inch diameter line. So as a basis of comparison, somebody who's using, you know, 150,000 gallons would be paying New Jersey American about $7,300 a year as compared to about 16,000 change to us. So that's a significant difference, I think, for businesses. And I just want to point that out. And this is not making an argument one way or the other. This is where we are and what things cost. And that's really a driver behind what Mayor Kennedy was saying was, we're trying to find solutions. And I think it's our sense that this is not a situation that we can sustain. So what are we going to do about it? Can I have the next slide, please? I'm skipping over a little bit, but everybody kind of knows about PFAS. If you don't, you haven't been checking your mail. So, I'll just update very quickly for two reasons. One, well, this is our most recent data, so everything remains below the state MCL or maximum contaminant limit. Although it's important to recognize there's a federal standard that will take effect in 5 years, that everybody nationwide will have to apply to that's more stringent. So either way, the intention would be if we keep the system, we have to have a treatment system. From that, and the next slide, please. So this is very quickly where we are with the PFAS situation. So we applied for a grant. The application is to the NJDEP, but it's actually federal money that comes through the state of New Jersey. They administer. We applied in February. We're still in contact with them relatively frequently. They have submitted the information to the EPA and they're waiting to hear back from the EPA. They also are aware that we're possibly selling the system, but this whole situation or this grant application is on track. Nothing has changed because we're keeping all of our options open and they're being very helpful and supportive with this. So if we get that grant for 2.34 million, that would allow us to not only put in a PFAS treatment system in well number 4, which is our currently operating well, but we could bring well number 6 back online, which is the well in Borough Park, which has been offline since 2000 because of naturally occurring arsenic. So this would fund treatment of PFAS, and the assumption is we'd have to treat PFAS there too, because it's the same aquifer and the well's only 1,000 feet away. So this would actually fund treatment of PFAS at both wells, treatment of arsenic at well number 6, and give us a new air stripper in well number 4. That would also involve building an actual treatment building in the park, because the little well house we have is beautiful. So it wouldn't house all of this. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about, and this is really mundane stuff, but it's important when we're looking at the underpinnings of all this. So we have something called an asset management plan that was developed by the Borough engineer, by their firm. It's actually, I think they started the process where they had a draft in about 2022, but it was really finalized in 2024. And this is actually required by statute that all water systems have to do this. And the purpose of developing the asset management plan is, first of all, do an inventory of all of your physical assets. That's pipes, valves, fire hydrants, everything, wells. And secondly, an assessment of the condition. What is its useful lifetime? What's the condition of it? I mean, that will assign, for example, to a main, they might say it can have a useful lifetime of 100 years, but if it was put in 1904, you may need a new main. And for other aspects of it as well, because they get direct feedback on the condition of things from Dave Moss, like in our water department, who sees a lot of this stuff every time he repairs a leak. And then they also do a risk assessment of a couple of things. What's the likelihood of that thing failing or breaking, but also what are the consequences if it does? So there might be things that are likely to fail, but the consequences are minimal. On the other hand, there might be things where the consequence of failure is significant. And so by doing that, you prioritize your capital projects. And the idea is that over a defined time frame, you can come up with a list of priority projects that you need to address to basically keep your system functioning properly, and be investing in your infrastructure the way that you should. And I will say that prior to this, we had nothing like this in terms of a systematic analysis. I mean, mostly the driver behind where we would replace mains was when we were doing a street paving project. We'd say, okay, is this main in good enough shape that it'll last another 20 years until we repave it? Or while the road is open, should we do it now? And that's pretty much, or, something is leaking frequently and it requires repair. But this is a much more systematic way of doing it. And also, the timing is really good because it gives us lots of information for planning, looking at the next decade or so about the things that are on the horizon that we have to deal with in our water system if we keep it. They have the so kind of boring, but this is the kind of risk scheme that I talked about, this is right out of their reports. They talk about consequence of failure and likelihood of failure. And then they kind of score things and they assign a score. And these are the things where it's, high consequence and high likelihood. And so those are the things that are really the highest priority. Some of these things are somewhat lower priority, but it basically says, replacement or renewal may be required in the near future. Some things that are less urgent, keep inspecting them, pay attention, but in the next 10 or 15 years, you may have to do something about it. So that's kind of the background. So what I did, and just a little bit, I put together a quick list today out of the inventory, actually, of things that we've replaced, since 2020. I just said, I'll shuffle the list. I have it all in Excel, and it was kind of interesting. So it's almost 8,000 feet of water mains, but out of the 10.5 miles, about 24% of our valves. And these are large valves, 4, 6, and 8-inch diameter pipes, for example. Fire hydrants, about a quarter of those. And most recently, and very importantly, replaced the pump in well number 4, which has increased our output from the well substantially and saving us a bunch of money. So I just thought I'd put that out. Next slide, please. Couple of things that are areas of concern. And one of them is the reservoir. So the reservoir is mostly below ground. It's brick, it's lined with concrete. It was built in 1914. It's past its estimated 75-year design life. It provides, because of the elevation, it's up in the township on North Star Avenue. The difference in elevation is what gives us that 125 pounds per square inch in town. It's leaking, and we weren't sure how much it was leaking. And I'll back up a little bit, but as most of you know, we discovered a couple of years ago, we had a major leak actually in a residential line that was just cost us an enormous amount of money, but it led to bringing in a contractor that actually has installed a network of sensors throughout the town, that leak detection and monthly leak monitoring. So now there were leaks that were never identifiable before because they didn't show up at the surface, and now we can find them. So every month we get a report, and anything new that shows up, we home in on it. And as we did that, as we addressed all these leaks systematically, we were waiting to see what our system losses were going to be, because anything left over is probably from this. So at the worst, and I know this is a shocking number, we had what's called unaccounted for water, which is the percentage of water that's basically not being metered that's going elsewhere, was 46% in 2023. I know, shocking. And by the way, not that uncommon in old systems. I was reading a report by the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and they did a survey of 300 utilities on both sides of the river, and about 15% of them had numbers that were in the 30 to 40% range. Part of it is you have these leaks that don't show up at the surface. I mean, when we have a leak, anybody knows about a leak. If it's on somebody's property or in the street, the water department gets right on it. But there are leaks that don't express themselves at the surface. You don't see moisture at the surface. They're not visible. You can't hear them. The way they find them is with instruments that actually listen to the vibrations that are made when the water goes through the pipes. So anyway, we have a contractor on a multi-year contract that does this. And we've actually been able to reduce our monthly purchases of water from New Jersey American, which is much more expensive to purchase than it is to produce from the wellhead. I think our bill was less than $15,000 this year. At the worst, when we had this really large leak, we had a $30,000 bill. So costs have come down. But what we're finding is we're now at about between 28 and 30% unaccounted for water in the system. And there may still be some leaks. I know there's at least one that we're addressing, but most of them are relatively small magnitude. So what that suggests to us is that we're having substantial losses from this. Anyway, sorry, it was a long-winded thing, but this is important. And it's one of the things that we're going to have to prioritize. Next slide, please. And generally speaking, and this is one of the leaks we fixed this summer. I don't know if you can see that little fountain of water coming out. Just sort of an example. So I talked about those risk scores before, and some of the really high risk ones that have scores of 15 are targeted in our 3-year capital plan, but there are other ones that are perhaps less urgent, but they're still in need of work. And so we're thinking about these in terms of a 10-year time frame. What really bothered me about this leak was it's one thing when you have a crack because somebody drives a truck over it, stretches the pipe. This is a hole that actually corroded through that pipe, and that means that that length of pipe is really needs to be replaced. And all we could do was a short term, this is right across the street from Borough Hall. It goes right across. You know, so this is, I just wanted to show you this as an example of it, so you can see what they look like. Next slide, please.
Can I just ask one quick question? How
Yeah.
old are those pipes that
Uh,
are leaking?
Well, this is an interesting thing. We have mains that are over 100 years old that are in great shape. And we have mains that were put in the 50s and 60s that are in terrible shape. I guess because the quality of the pipe wasn't the same, but also because sometimes they weren't installed correctly. So when you install a pipe, as anybody knows who's done in their backyard, you hit that rock pretty quickly, you don't get down very far. So when you put a pipe in, you're supposed to go dig enough underneath it and put sand down there so there's a cushion under that pipe. So when there's stress over it and a truck's driving over it, doesn't crack the pipe. Well, there, some of the developments that were built in the 60s, they didn't do that. I don't know who the engineer was, he wasn't here. And so there are places that are sort of repeat offenders where Dave Wise, these guys have to fix breaks fairly frequently, more when the ground use decrease harder, but then there are other ones, so they range it, but there are ones that are from the 50s and 60s that are actually high on our target list because for whatever reason, the condition, I'm not sure about the age of that one that I just showed you.
So they're mostly lead pipes?
Oh, no, they're all steel pipes. So, right, the lead, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. So the way that water services were traditionally installed up until the 70s, when they stopped using lead piping, was they would use something called a lead gooseneck, which is about this long. It's this S-shaped piece of pipe. And it's connected basically to the main. And then the other end is connected to the service line that goes to the property, whether it's a house or a business. The reason they put that piece of lead pipe in there is that the lead is flexible. So if there was stress on the main, somebody was driving over it, it was less likely to crack. And that all seemed great in the days when we didn't worry about lead. So the interesting thing is, so probably every connection in town built before the 1970s would have had a gooseneck on it. Dave Weislich has been with us for 37 years, and he started changing them out his first day on the job. So every time we have a street project where we have to replace a main, the first thing he does is go in and change out the goosenecks. The ones that are left are all below Broad Street, which is a county road, which we haven't had any paving projects on. There are 48 of them, I believe, out of a total of 763 connections. So basically 90% of those are gone, and they were removed, most of them long ago. But then in 2021, the state passed what's called the lead service line replacement law. That basically mandated that all lead service lines have to be removed within 10 years. And that includes not only actual lines that are made of lead, like those goosenecks, but they also classified galvanized service lines, which are basically zinc plated, as also lead service lines. The reason was apparently in the old days, there were some types of piping that may have had lead coatings. It's hard to tell the difference, and just to be safe, they said anybody who's got a steel service line has to come out. So there's a 10-year time frame by 2031 to remove those. And the burden of it, I mean, if the homeowner does it voluntarily to take up their section of the line, that's great. The public, all the stuff in the public right of way is our responsibility. But if the homeowner doesn't do it on their property, it's our responsibility to do it and either assess the cost on the homeowner or spread it out across the cost of the utility, and it adds up. So I'll talk about that a little bit more here, but I'm gonna back up a little bit. So I'm gonna get to it right here, but what I wanted to do, we've gone through this analysis that the water team and Doug has provided an enormous amount of help on this. So look realistically at what we think our capital needs would be in the next 10 years, water mains, hydrants, that sort of thing, and the reservoir. And so we identified key items that we thought are things that have to be addressed in the next decade, and then we want to put a price tag on them so we can get an idea of what we'd have to bond for to do it. To go out a little farther than that 3-year analysis that we're done. So the first thing on there, of course, is the reservoir, which you've all heard of. Next are the lead service line. So there are 48 of these goosenecks under Broad Street, as I said, and the problem with Broad Street is there's about 9 inches of steel reinforced concrete underneath the pavement. That's how they built that highway. So every time you want to replace a service connection, you have to bring in a big diamond saw and saw cut through. And some of these connections you're going through, 30 feet across the road. So it adds to the cost substantially. We just repaired 3 leaks under Broad Street and it was 40,000, I think.
Yeah, 4 leaks for 7,000.
4 different locations, and that's what it costs to do those. So and it's beyond our internal capabilities. We don't have the equipment to do it. So to do 48 of those, we got an estimate for just those, just to do what I call the public side, not the customer lines, of about $700,000 just to do the ones on Broad Street. And that's a regulatory requirement, and we have to do it at some point before 2031. And then we have 105 currently galvanized customer service lines that either have to be done by the customers themselves, or if they don't do it, we have to do it. And then we added up the pricing on that, and it got almost $1.2 million. Also on this list are other main replacements that were not as as critical as I missed the ones up here. These are the high scoring mains, the ones that mostly Broad Street, 7,000 feet of mains, very expensive, 3.4 million. Sorry, I skipped right over that one. Those are the ones that had the high risk scores that were prioritized in the next 3 years. And then this is other ones that are less urgent, but probably in the next 10 years, another 2.3 million. And valves, hydrants, pretty much self-explanatory. So when you do all that, and by the way, the way we price these, we actually had engineers' estimates for several of these mains, so we could come up with a price per linear foot. Our database tells you how many feet, we add it up, do the math. And so they're not perfect estimates, but they're pretty good. So we got $8.7 million in the next 10 years. Big number. And so next slide.
Sure. And as we're switching, David, I see this doesn't include the cost of PFAS
Oh, no,
remediation.
right,
So
thank you.
those have been,
So there's a presumption here that we hopefully will get the $2.3 million grant for the PFAS treatment systems and all the other treatment systems I described. That's not on this list. We think we have a pretty good chance of getting the grant, but the EPA hasn't said yes. So if for some reason that were denied, you would add another 2.3 million to this. Thank you, Ryan. That's an important point. So what we tried to do is to then translate this into budget forecasting, and there's different elements of the budget. Now, Doug did a lot of the work, so he looked at salaries, benefits, operating costs, just making sure that we're looking at those realistically. And because, for example, how we allocate people's salaries between different departments and how we finance these things, and looking at, normal annual increases in salary, I think 4% was the number you use, something like that. And then we have all these capital projects to factor in, and whatever the cost is to bond for those things, basically borrowing. So what we did is to basically, based on a series of assumptions, come up with a model. And I'll repeat this a million times. I had a professor said all models are wrong, but some are more wrong than others. So you have to qualify it, but it's a what if scenario that says, okay, if we're going to address these needs and we're going to look realistically at what our costs would be, what would our budgets look like over the next 10 years? And that's absolutely essential to kind of be an anchor for any analysis we do, whether we sell or stay. So 4% annual escalator for salaries and so on. Now, this is an important point right here. I should have put it in a different color. No water purchase in New Jersey American after 2025 except in emergencies. That is because if in 2026, starting in 2026, we have those treatment systems in place, we will be able to provide all of our own water locally from those 2 wells, unless one of them is down, in which case we still have the interconnection for an emergency, which is obviously, that's almost an ideal situation. They do, however, charge a monthly service fee, so we still pay about $12,000 a year as compared with about $250,000 a year for water. But to basically have that service, you're going to pay something. But the other thing is that now we have these new treatment systems, and we have to basically pay for the cost of what we call O&M, operation and maintenance. And so the treatment systems have a filter medium that has to be changed out periodically, and so you have 2 PFAS systems, an arsenic system. So we're estimating that the annual cost of maintenance is about $75,000 a year. So you save $250,000, but you pay this. We're also making the assumption that we have no new treatment or regulatory requirements, which is probably not a valid assumption, because in my experience in 25 years, it's about every 5 years, something new comes along that we have to respond to. But for the purpose of this, let's just assume that for 10 years, we're good. We also covered extra energy costs because we now have 2 wells running, and most of our energy consumption is running the well pump, so now we have 2 instead of 1. Oh, next slide, please.
My screen here.
Oh, there we go. Oh. So translating up, instead of boring you with a lot of tables, what I tried to do is I ran all the numbers with all Doug's great work on salaries and operating costs. And Doug, so if I got this right, so the assumption is we are bonding for $1 million a year additionally each year at 3% over a 20-year term for each of those. Okay. And so Doug did the math for me. So we basically had debt service would be as it starts to accumulate each year as we go forward. So, and then adding all that together, this is what our budget would be. So our budget right now is $848,500. That's for our 2024 budget. Interesting thing, you see this drop, that's when you suddenly stop buying water from New Jersey American and save $150,000 a year. However, at that time, then these additional, the bonding starts to come in, because each year you're bonding for another $1 million. And we're basically, the idea was, let's spread that out instead of, saying, oh my gosh, we have to bond for $8.7 million today. We're going to prioritize and spread this out over a decade. So you see this kind of linear increase, but there's 2 curves here. And I thought it was really important to do this. One of these assumes that we just bond for this and we absorb all that cost. That's debt service is ours. The other is, what if we could get grants for half of it, right? I mean, I don't know whether you can get grants for all of it, might not be realistic, but there are also different grant sources, federal and state. So let's say out of that 8.7 million, 4.3 and change, we're able to get grants for, in addition to the other grants. So what would the impact of that be? And again, it's a model, it's not perfect, but it's just trying to give us an order of magnitude of where we would be. And as you can see, so under the we pay for everything part, just about an 85% increase over 10 years, so roughly 8.5% annually. A more modest increase over 10 years if we were able to get funding for half of that. Next slide. If you're around me, you just have to deal with paralysis. So you saw that rate graph that I showed you before, which was our current rates. This is my crystal ball of 2034 rates. This is at the end of that 10 years, where might we be based on that budget? So I know how our rates relate. We know how our rates relate to our budget. What we have to, we have to generate that amount of revenue. So we ratcheted up the rates just across the board. It didn't change the allocation between different users. And so under the no grant scenario, this would be our rate structure in 2034, somewhat more modest with 50% getting grants. And this curve is the curve for New Jersey American, assuming that they raise their rates by 10% every year during the next decade. And I did that. I mean, I'm looking at our costs going back to 2006 when we first had the interconnection. Their average annual increase overall is about 6%, but in the last couple of years, there's been there's been one 13% increase, I think, in 2022, and they're asking for a substantially larger one now. We'll see if it hits in September. So I said, let's just make it 10%. Let's make it so every 2 years, there's a 20% increase, and see whether they catch up to us under this scenario. So it's a little complicated because remember before we were saying how we subsidize this part, these customers, and they don't. They just had a connection fee based on the size of your line, and then they charge you so many dollars per 1,000 gallons. I applied that 10% both to the service fee and the water fee. That may not be correct. I don't even know if the BPU would let them do that, but I thought we should see it, what it would look like. So this could have a disproportionate effect on the people with lower income. I also know from reading on their website that they actually, if you meet their income criteria, they will actually waive the monthly fee and just charge you the cost of the water, which, but I don't know what the criteria are for that, but these are all factors that we have to think about. Because the incidence of these changes affects different people in different ways. But where this puts us is under the worst case scenario with us is we're about double. You can just see proportionately the rate of New Jersey American under these scenarios and maybe 40% more under that other. And I have another version of the slide that has real numbers on it, but I wanted to show you this uncluttered version first. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the data that is showing there, right? When we get that bill, it includes the water and the sewer. The sewer is much more expensive than the water component of it.
Yes,
What you're talking about here is just the water.
just the water, right?
So essentially, when you're saying, we go up by 10% or whatever, our water, the amount we pay won't go up by 10%, because the sewer is a separate thing, right? It's only 5%, right? Because the water component is only half of the check that we cut every quarter.
That's right. And the sewer is actually a separate, the sewer is fiscally under a separate bucket, if you will. The water is its own utility. I mean, we put the bills together because your sewer bill is based on your water usage, because we don't have any way of directly measuring the sewer.
But I'm correct in thinking that the data you're showing is just the water.
It's just nothing to do with sewer, actually. And our sewer rates are actually pretty low compared to a lot of other towns around here. It's actually a good thing because it moderates the overall cost, even though, I mean, I know, for example, Rocky Hill has much higher sewer rates. I guess it's Montgomery Township, but anyway. So if I could have the next version of this is the same graph, but trying to, again, put some tags on it. Forgive the clutter, but, so if we were looking in 2034, again, based on this estimate with all my caveats, a user of 150,000 gallons a quarter, would be paying about $14,000 a year. Under our worst case scenario, they'd be paying about $30,000 a year in Hopewell, or $23,000 a year if we were able to get grants for half of that. So still a substantial difference on this side. On the other hand, somebody who's only using 2,000 gallons a month is going to be paying substantially more. Again, if my projections are correct, I don't know whether they are. New Jersey Americans relative to Hopewell. And if you're in this area as the median user, these things start to converge a little bit. They get pretty close to probably about the same area. I didn't put numbers on these because I just didn't want to clutter it up too much, make it hard to see. This is 100,000 gallons versus 150,000 gallons, but order of magnitude. And this is just the last slide, which maybe it should have come first, but it's useful because it kind of shows you the distribution of water usage by customers. So this is number of customers. So the largest number of people are in this 10 to 20,000 gallons per quarter range. The median is as I said, 10,000. And then, but there are 54 households or businesses that only use 2,000 gallons or less per quarter. So that was just to give you an idea of how people, and then obviously we have commercial operations here that use just substantially.
Is that commercial or is that teenage girls who pay?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. What was that?
Whether it was commercial or whether it was teenage girls making 45 minutes.
I won't opine on that. You never know. Well, but there have been situations where people have had leaks in their service lines, and this is an issue because we don't get to bill for those because the meter's at the house. So just talking about those leaks again very briefly. There was a service line leak that was. We found out that we were losing 20,000 gallons a day, and once the leak was fixed, that was how our demand changed. It was 7.3 million gallons, give or take, a year, coming from a little plastic line this big, and nobody can see here until.
Could you walk through the leaks? Because I heard you say there was a leak found this year, and that's when you put in the sensors, but then I just heard you say like last year there was another.
Oh, there are multiple leaks.
But these like giant 20,000 gallon a day, so there was one in 2024.
There was one that was repaired in, I'm gonna say it's October 2023. I should know this by heart, I have it on a million graphs.
Okay, so
And
20
that was a residential leak that was 20,000 gallons. That's the largest magnitude leak I've ever seen. But we found after that, once we had, this company that's putting in these that runs these sensors across town. There were probably 8 or 10 leaks around town that were found right away. There were lower magnitude. I mean, you kind of estimate some of that, you wait to see when the leak is fixed, how much the demand
Right.
drops. But the biggest one that I know of was actually a residential leak, which was a surprise, because I would have thought, an 8-inch main with a crack in it would be the thing that would be losing all, in this particular
So
one.
so the large residential one was in October 2023?
I mean, it was fixed in October 23. It was,
Okay, right,
yeah.
so it was detected, and when were those sensors installed?
the sensors were installed in.
We contracted in 2023 for them, I believe.
And they, oh, that's right, yeah, and it was when, that's all good. So he was installing the system in September of 2023, and in the process of doing that, before he actually had all the sensors installed, he picked up a signal for this particular leak and found it manually with his instruments, and they immediately identified it and went to the homeowner and got fixed.
Were there any like big giant leaks like that in 2022? Just because there's been some unclear information about how many like these big giant undetected residential.
Right, so there were a lot of undetected leaks, most of them not of that same magnitude, but it's also, so I have. This is geeky stuff, but I have a database, I have all of our flow numbers for the month, metered numbers, I've been tracking this stuff now retroactively to 2006. So I can understand what these patterns look like, because it's very hard to see these things. I mean, when your water bill goes up, we're buying more from New Jersey American, we know there's a problem, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the nature of the problem or where it is. And so, when the sensors were put in, the deal with those is there's 64 of them across town. They're automated, they operate late at night, there's very little road noise and people aren't using much water, and they listen and they download the data once a month. And then if they get a signal between sensor A and B, they say, okay, we've got a problem, and here they go out with field instruments, and they actually listen to the ground microphones and they pinpoint it. Sometimes it's on a person's private property, sometimes it's in the street. And then they report to us, and then we figure out what to do about it. So there are the leaks that we know about, where there's water coming out of the ground and Public Works and Water Department gets right on it. They're the ones that we don't know about because there's not so much as wet spot. And this one that was 20,000 gallons, there was no sign of it at the surface, nothing.
How many days?
How many days?
Yeah.
We can't know because it's not metered, but I'm guessing from what I can see on my curve, it was probably more than a year. So I'm guessing it was at least 7 or 8 million gallons of water.
And that is what has reflected in our higher cost.
Well, there are a lot of other aspects to your higher cost, but what happened is that particular leak alone, not other leaks, added about $80,000 to our water purchasing costs for 2023. And we had to make up that cost in our 2024 budget. We also there were some other unanticipated expenses as well. Altogether, I think it was 112,000 or 120,000 over. And the way it works is when you're a public utility, you have to be self-liquidating. So that the state finance board basically says you have to bring in what you need to cover your expenses. So if you were over last year, you have to raise that amount of money this year. And that's why in part, why we had that large bump in 2024. Again, since then, we've done 2 things that have improved our water production cost. One was obviously finding the leaks and mitigating them wherever we can. The second one was replacing the pump in well number 4, which was at about the end of its useful life. But what we didn't realize is that I suddenly saw this decline in output over a couple of months, and we moved very quickly on replacing the pump. It was like a $30,000 replacement, wasn't that much money. But suddenly we went from 60 gallons per minute to 100 gallons per minute. It upped our output for that well, which means that's less water that we're buying. So that, combined with fixing the leaks, has reduced the overall amount of water that we have to produce. And it's also reduced the proportion of that water that we have to produce. However, we're kind of up against the wall with the reservoir, which is a more complicated project.
David, could I maybe ask a follow-up question to that? On a going forward basis, the analysis that you showed about rates, does it assume, and my assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the biggest immediate expense from leaks is currently purchasing water from New Jersey American. On a going forward basis on the modeling, we're assuming any water costs or very, what type of water purchase are we looking at? So when we look at our rates might be in 10 years, thinking back, there was a big hit for unaccounted water because we had to buy it from New Jersey American. But looking 5-10 years after perhaps we get this grant, are the unaccounted water costs directly result in any kind of cost savings? It looked to me that we're assuming we had zero water costs going
Well,
forward.
it's not zero cost, but
The maintenance fee.
think of it this way, so there's the maintenance on the filtration equipment, which is a matter of how much you put through it, and there's energy, right? We're spending about $20,000 a year on electricity for well number 4, so figure 40,000 for that. So, but relative to purchasing $200,000 to $300,000 worth of water a year, it's an enormous difference. So if we get a treatment system in place starting 2026, all fingers crossed, and we're still doing this. And right now, our annual purchasing budget for that water is about 250,000. So take that off the table, then add in about 12,000 for the monthly service fees, and let's say 60,000 a year for O&M and a little extra for energy. So maybe $150,000. Let's say you're going to save overall under that scenario.
So maybe put a different way.
Yeah.
2 years ago, a big leak would have cost us $100,000 in purchased water.
Exactly.
A
And
big
now-
leak, once we produce all of our water in-house,
Right.
what does that mean for us from a cost perspective?
It's
not
less, but I can't quite, it's not nothing, but it's substantially less because our fundamental costs, I mean, at least without the treatment systems, is mostly the energy cost and sampling and that. So it's a fraction of what we pay to purchase water. So, but the other thing is that if we are able to get the reservoir fixed, repaired or replaced, apparently what a lot of towns do is they just fill up a steel tank above ground and rather than fix the old one. I have no idea. We haven't had the opportunity yet to figure out what would need to be done to fix the tank we have. It's a big deal to send somebody in a place like that. It's a confined space and, Tom's nodding his head because he knows what I'm talking about. Under tanks. But yeah.
When you're saying like our water needs, it seems like there's the two issues I'm trying to like understand summarizing here. There's two issues. There's the water quality, which is, you were saying, the PFOAs and arsenic and all that stuff. And then there's water quantity. So there's quality, quantity. So the quality we're hoping to get with the grant and some repairs and things, get that taken care of. In terms of quantity, how do you measure how much is needed? This is like my, 10-minute expert thing. I just heard a podcast recently. We're talking about, with the municipal water system, you have this combined need of drinking like potable water, and a certain amount of pressure needed for like firefighting and stuff like that. So like, how do you determine the need? The need in terms of pressure and quantity that needs to be on hand at all times for fighting fires really dictates the floor of what's needed in terms of quantity. Is that correct?
So the state has, there are state rules on what are called firm capacity that address that.
Mhm.
And part of it is what alternate sources you have in case one of your sources is offline. So let's say your pump fails, or I don't know, you have some other issue and you want to have something else in place. In this particular situation, if we get this grant, we would have a second well online. So those two wells would provide all of our normal demand. We would still have the interconnection, which is capable of providing all of our demand for the system if we needed it. So if one of those wells went down, you could kick in the interconnection. For firefighting, I'm not sure what the requirement is exactly. We have 230,000 gallons is the capacity of our reservoir. So if that thing is basically full and you lose power and everything else, that's, I think that's usually enough for 12, 14 hours, 15 hours, depending on people's demand. We actually got through a long weekend with only well number 4 in the reservoir over Labor Day weekend because New Jersey American had a water main break and we didn't have supply from them. But that's actually something we have to go through with our engineers, is make sure that in the long run, we're meeting all those requirements. The state has been kind of light-handed with small systems about that, but it is important. I mean, you obviously have to have enough for fire suppression and you have to have enough that for whatever your contingencies would be. So I guess I don't know if that answers your question. Basically, you have two wells that are providing your principal source, a backup system of the interconnection, which we would still be paying for to have it in case we need it, and which could be activated at any moment.
And so David, is it fair to say that for the grants that we're securing for that second well, the PFAS remediation, those wells are essentially sized to accommodate the expected need
Oh, yeah.
of the town?
Right.
And then the rates that you talked about and showed also assume that we'd get that money to do that and be producing all that water.
Yeah, so, I mean, well 6 has a higher yield. I can't remember the exact numbers on well number 4. But I mean, if you're getting 100 gallons per minute out of well number 4 and 100 or 120 out of well number 6, that covers us. I mean, that's, but again, in a storm, you could have boil water in New Jersey American, in which case we shut off the interconnection and we're just using what we do internally. I mean, or the other way around. We've never actually had a water in the borough. And this requires a lot of on-site management to manage it. Yep.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
Question, do we know where we stand in the 46% or whatever it is of the leaks? Do we know where other comparable municipalities, local or otherwise, with a similar age of infrastructure? Are we crazy or are we about?
Well, it's not a good number. We're about 30 now, but that's still not a good number. Well, I think I mentioned before, so there was this report that was done by the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission in 2016, about, they were surveying and they were looking at this issue. It's a very widespread issue. My recollection is that about 1 in 6 had numbers that were in the 30 to 40% range. Then, they may have been fixed. The state rule is you're supposed to keep your quote unaccounted for water. There's an actual, it's not necessarily legal. Sometimes it's water that you're not metering, or that, there's water that sometimes you're just not, but it's supposed to be less than 15%, right? A really tight system is 10%, I'm told, at least for a system that is better. So that's the goal.
I'm just interested in knowing, and where my question is going.
Yeah.
If we undertake an endeavor to get to 15, how does that overall reflect over X period?
Well, it depends. It's sort of getting to what Ryan was saying. If we're not buying water externally, which is much more expensive. Yeah, if you think of the interconnection like a well, that's like the expensive well, the one you don't want to turn on. I don't know that would have it would have an impact on our rates because we would be saving on the energy and on the operation and maintenance, whatever the per gallon operational costs are for the treatment systems. But I think that's substantially less than the actual costs associated with buying it. So, but on the other hand, there are some other advantages. So let's say you have a reservoir that's the same size and you're leaking 30% of your water. That means that reservoir effectively has less capacity, right? If, for example, when they had the water main break over by Princeton Airport, and what we had was what we have in the reservoir, we could refill with well number 4. If you're not leaking as much water, you're not wasting water, and you can get through those things a little bit more efficiently.
David, if I could try to give my version of that summary,
Yeah.
is that while we would always continue to get to the goal of 10 or 15% and continue our permanent, kind of whack-a-mole game of finding leaks, the cost savings element of finding leaks is kind of done after 2026. Would be minor. The numbers that we looked at, the big water purchase years, $250,000 of water purchase, we're looking at $14,000 of a connection fee. And we're talking about an overall $75,000, $80,000 per year for the electricity and consumable media for the filters and things for the plants. Maybe that varies a little bit, but it's not the type of cost savings that we realize at a time when we're buying all the water from New Jersey American.
Right.
So in my mind, the cost estimates that we're looking at, you know, and estimates are estimates, but these assumptions about this cost of the system and what our rates would be almost assume that we would find all the leaks. Or if they don't assume it, it's almost not relevant to the cost.
Right.
And that graph.
And it is a whack-a-mole and, you know, oh, sure.
Yeah, I had a question,
Yeah.
because I'm here the second time because of my concern over the quickness to put the for sale sign out and the downsides of privatizing. And I think I heard a lot of that from other people in the last meeting. But I still haven't heard like a lot about the efforts for really committing to keeping our water system. And we do have Rocky Hill, Pennington, Flemington, somebody mentioned South Brunswick. You know, we can look at all these other municipalities who are managing their water supply, talk to them about their assumptions, best case scenario, worst case scenario. This doesn't have to be as much of a guessing game as it seems to be in terms of estimating the cost and the methods for maintaining our own system. So what do we need to do to, get that going?
Well, I guess I'll say it's,
Last time, and I'm asking again.
I guess I'll say it continues and it would continue in a parallel track to any other effort. You know, I personally spoke to the people at Trenton Waterworks this week. We've talked to Pennington. We'll continue to talk to iBank. They're the people who do the loans and some of the free money, DEP. That continues kind of unabated. And until, in my mind, there is, even in the most aggressive scenario, which in our minds would be about a year from now, perhaps, where we would even have a number to consider or think about for a sale, either a purchase price or a rate commitment from an interested party. Between now and then, we continue full bore with both of those things to perhaps adjust these assumptions, hopefully in the right direction. But in the last couple of months, every time we relook at these assumptions, if you want to compare this to the Phoenix report, they don't go the right way. You know, the more things we look at needing to do, the more expensive it looks like in the future. But we will continue to do that. We will continue to explore grant opportunities like the one that, a lot of people ask me about the PFAS as far as a decision point in whether we keep it or sell it. To be honest with you, if we were to sell the system, we likely, hopefully, would pay the rates that Montgomery, that Princeton pay, about half of ours. And that baked into that is their PFAS remediation. On our side, we've secured grants that it's not quite safe to say would take care of it, but more or less that's not listed on the capital projects because we were able to work up about $2.3 million of commitments from federal government and DP to do that. And we continue doing that. And in David's, one second, and in the figures going forward that we look at, it assumes a significant amount of grant, free money in those curves.
So my concern is the full board.
Okay.
In year, Lisa. So the full board is, you have a council of 7 people, 3 people on the committee, 1 person who's an expert in the matter. You have residents who are scientists, physicists, engineers. Can you not involve more people to get the full board a little fuller? So that we could really get this solved within a year's time, so we're not selling? I mean, you're kind of, it sounds like we're winding up, like waiting for the year to tick by so we can sell it.
No, I'm sorry that it sounds.
I'm sorry, I really take issue with that characterization. First of all, this is not a guessing game. I've spent countless hours going through that asset management report, sorting data, looking at the scores, prioritizing them, talking to engineers, assigning values to those things. Okay, there are, the guessing game may have to do with what you think future rates are going to be with other utilities, but as far as our work, it's pretty solid. And that's just making sure that we have a sound basis for making decisions. Even if you're off by 10% on an $8.7 million capital estimate, it's giving you a pretty solid order of magnitude for the things that we have to do. So I have to respectfully take issue with that. No, I'm talking about how much work it is. I'm telling you, excuse me, Jim, excuse me. I think I have the floor. It's a quantitative analysis that's based on facts, that's based on a rigorous analysis that was done by our engineers that we're now trying to translate into useful information for decision making. We're not simply waving our arms. And I really, it's not about me, okay? I'm not the expert on all of this. I'm trying to put facts in front of people so that we can make informed decisions. And
Let me say, to that point, I don't think there's any lack of openness to more resources. The preference from council had been to rely more on the fiduciaries, our engineers. We have, I think, 3 engineering firms retained right now and a financial advisor. I'm not suggesting we need more, but we're not unopen to additional resources by any stretch.
but ultimately,
Would you mind just naming the engineering firms?
I would love to do that, and so Ferrero Engineering is our engineering firm. Sorry, I'll say I shouldn't even try. Formerly known as.
But we also have Suburban, which we retain specifically for water resource issues because they have actually, we retained them initially to put together the estimates for the grant proposal for the treatment systems, because that's their area of expertise.
It was
So,
suggested at the last meeting to form a cooperative with the other municipalities that have maintained their own water systems. They're, either direction, Rocky Hill, Pennington, Flemington, I'm sure the list goes on, and that we could learn from the others.
So
Together.
So I personally think that those are excellent ideas. And in a situation where we're actually doing that, and perhaps we even bake some of that assumptions on cost savings into our model, which is perhaps pretty, I'm not gonna say rosy because it doesn't look good, but there's a lot of assumptions there of things that we're gonna get for free, or things that are more discounted than we really could get them in the past. However, one second. But a lot of those savings and costs are incremental savings from things that we're not yet paying for and don't have now. So to the extent we buy those things, working with Pennington, working with these other entities certainly does make sense. But those are incremental savings of big numbers of things that we're not yet purchasing, right? So we could bulk purchase pipes, for example. Maybe there's an incremental difference in what it looks like for the $2.3 million water main project, but it's not something that go away, and what in those figures makes it go away is assuming we get half of it for free. We're not so sure that's a realistic assumption, but ultimately 100% yes, to the extent that expertise and in this model, we've baked in additional resources. Right now, frankly, we put a lot on our administrator, which we don't charge to the water system. The billing is done by our clerk, which isn't really what charged the water system. We have one employee, and in some of this we've budgeted a little bit more, but frankly, even looking at, because again, we don't want to present something that says, well, our rates are going to be $1 billion a month, because we've added all these costs. We're kind of, I don't say lowballing them, but we would put in this model $60,000 for another employee. To be honest with you, we probably couldn't hire the type of person we need for anything close to that. It would be more than that. But to your point, when we get to that point, we would certainly look at shared services. Unfortunately, there are other shared services rates that we're talking to Pennington about at the time, and there are distance issues. Some of these things are functions of being close physically to what you're doing. Things that are back office things, expertise, not so much. We could share with Trenton Water Works, perhaps a high level system engineer or something like that. But I guess my point is, one, yes, and two, I hope you didn't think that we were looking and considering those things. But my point would be that when we look at these order of magnitude costs that go into our rates now currently being way higher than New Jersey American, why we're even looking at this, is that when we add the things we need to do, those savings are incremental savings from things that aren't factored into our already unconscionable rates, unfortunately.
The thing that I wanted to bring up and policy on that is, has anyone investigated how old these other systems are? And they're similar ages, they probably need similar type of maintenance. And again, we can talk to them, say, all right, well, you have to replace all your water mains, but we all do it at the same time, have one contractor do it, can we get a lesser rate that would bring down the cost of, let's say, that $8 million or almost $9 million to, let's say, 7, 6. And just work with them, and again, maybe collective. We try to bring down that, so our rates, but yeah, it may still be above what Jersey American is, but at least we still have local control. So I think a lot of people here are afraid of, well, now we turn it over to New Jersey American, they can do whatever the hell they want. You know, you guys are, you know, responsible to us. You know, you don't do what you, we like. You know, Jersey American, they can just say, you know, I hope you, we're gonna do it all wrong.
No,
And actually, the answer to the board, public utilities.
And I'll just to follow up on that, I think that's a very fair comment. Well, when I look at, and again, I don't know that I can balance the pros and cons until we get to a point where we have something to look at, frankly, and I don't want it to seem like rushing at all. But when I want to have a meaningful comparison of what the assumptions we know what frankly New Jersey American is allowed to charge because they're regulated by BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, and they go every year and ask to increase it, and they get increases. But we generally, that's almost a known thing. And David made some assumptions, a 10% increase, whether it's high or low, it's understood. When we look at what control we have, I look at our last ordinance and say, we don't have control. Yes, technically, we set our rates by ordinance. 6 people with me breaking a tie get to do that, but we are bound to do nothing else but take the costs of maintaining the system, divided essentially by the 850 or so of us with water meters in town. So while we control, technically, we have to do by ordinance, we vote on it, we don't really have a choice to charge or do anything with the rates other than what our costs are. So yes, we continue to do everything that you've said, and certainly would. And while we're kind of shortcutting that part of the discussion, I think from looking forward, it's mostly because the other numbers are so big. You know, when you're looking at $2.5 million of pipe, we could spend an hour talking about maybe, you know, Pennington help us save $100,000 on it, and we would do that. But from an order of magnitude perspective, it's challenging. And but we certainly would do that, and we'll continue to do that. And you know, even just some examples of savings recently. We had a road project. We got the same contractor to fix a leak. You know, we do things like that too, even if they're just sharing amongst the type of work we're doing in town. You know, and would continue.
In future meetings, can that be, I think, more emphasized?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Now that's helpful. You know, it is really hard, frankly, to know what people want to hear. You know, in fact, it's really easy to not know. I'll say.
I had one other question then, David, on the slide you can have future rates, right? We make all these investments, rates go up, yes, I understand that. If we sell, you know, New Jersey American Water has a lower rate, but do they also invest the 8 million?
So this is the very,
That is, you know, it's a profit. So if they invest 8 million, they're gonna charge us, you know, what?
So, yeah, no. Critical question. So, well, apparently they don't make 30%. I think they make about 10, but, no.
Gross margin.
Yeah, but so there are a couple elements to this. So, well, actually 2. One is, if you sell the system, the usual arrangement is that the utility agrees to quote, hold your existing rates for a period of time. Now, that's great if you're selling a system where your rates are lower than their regional tariff, but the reverse is true here. What we would want is to be on their tariff. I mean, literally, the tariff that you're on, you leave town and go into Prince or Hopewell Township. That's the tariff we'd want to be on as soon as possible, because holding our rates for 3 or 4 years would not be good. It's one of the reasons why we, we're hoping to use the WIPA process, because it allows you to do some direct negotiation with a potential buyer. Whereas under the traditional process, all the specifications, all the terms and conditions go into an RFP, and then you get a price and you accept or deny whatever the price is. Anyway, that's an aside, but one of the issues is a larger utility is able, apparently they make money on doing these capital costs. And basically, the way they justify their rates, as I understand it, is they go to the PPU and they say, okay, we've invested X number of millions of dollars across the state, or in this region tariff area, we'll call it that. And so it's justified for us to raise our rates and so on, but they actually make money on those investments. One advantage is that for us is that those costs are spread out across all their ratepayers. As opposed to, assessing them specifically on us. It's an interesting example. So with the lead service lines, if we were to do this, let's say that the 105 services that, where we either have to replace their lines and assess them the cost over 10 years, or the homeowner has to do it. Those costs are assessed to all the ratepayers, whether or not they ever had lead service lines. So there are developments out there that were built in the 90s or 2000 that never had a lead service line. There's an assessment charge that we actually pay on the water that we buy, a per gallon charge that covers that. So I think for the homeowners that have lead service lines, that would be a better deal. Now, as somebody else had pointed out, you could also have a situation where they have huge capital costs somewhere else that don't benefit us at all, and we're all paying a share of that. The question is, how are these costs allocated? But they would definitely do. Oh, the other thing that I've been told by people who actually are experts at this, engineers, is that the DEP takes a much harder stance with these utilities in terms of making them keep their water systems up to standard. So for example, something like that 15% unaccounted for water, they might be giving a little Hopewell a pass because they know we have limited resources, but they're not going to give a pass to a large utility. So the tendency is for those things to get addressed sooner rather than later. I mean, this is in a general way what I've been told by engineers who deal with this. So all in all, they would, A, they have a profit motive for doing it because they make money on it. And B, there's a regulatory driver to kind of insist that they do. So I think in the end, these things would get done.
But the future.
Can we have public comments, since lots of people want to talk,
Yep.
and it doesn't feel like.
Yep.
Should people line up or to be able to?
No, sorry.
So I had a comment, from maybe 10,000 feet up. I've been beginning to do some research in this area. And there seems to be an evisceration of the regulatory regime on this. For example, you're familiar with DISC, distribution system improvement charges. So that's a new legislative enactment that allows them off cycle from current rate hearings to be able to pass through immediately with minor hoops to jump through capital improvement costs. So my research is telling me that when you start invoking the regulatory comfort that we should feel, I'm going, whoa, that's not what's happening. Up here, I'm wearing my lawyer's hat, looking at all this regulatory shit, where this is becoming an expedited, fewer hoops to jump through for rate increases. One example, which is the DISC, the distribution system improvement charges, which is a direct allowable pass-through by legislation of capital improvement costs while, reading myself, but while there's a current rate hearing in place.
They have similar ones for lead as well as treated that way.
Well, the
I just don't
legislative
want to
line.
rely on,
Look, you identify themselves when they speak, so.
I'm sorry, David Wallman, Hopewell resident.
So every time we get a bill, I look at every single charge, every single surcharge. Okay, my joke is it's like staying in a hotel in New York, you go, all the little things. I have it all in a spreadsheet, I track every time one of them changes, I flag it in red. Okay, I know everything, I reconcile the charges and the usages to the penny. So that then I generate a column, a little check thing, so I know that I'm tracking it exactly, I mean, this is. Sorry. You know, but, so the distribution, I can't remember what the charge is, it's a modest charge compared to the other charges, the main charge we pay is the actual charge per gallon, the actual usage charge, but that's in there, there's also a lead service line replacement surcharge. They're allowed to, I believe they can update that every 6 months, but they do have to go in front of BPU and actually give them a list of the number of lead service lines that they've replaced and the amount of money they spend on it. They say, okay, we've spent $20 million across the state in the last 6 months, and we'll up it. And that charge is modest now, but it's climbing, right? So, yeah, I have no expertise as far as the BPU and the level of regulation. I've learned to read through the tariffs. I know how to read through the bills. I'm wily about this, just in the sense that every time something changes, I flag it. So far, that distribution system improvement charge hasn't been a significant driver in our costs, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be paying attention to it.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think we should be aware of the entire landscape of the apparent change in regulatory rules.
Thank you.
Mary,
But hold on, why don't we've been getting by with this being quite informal. I'd like to keep it that way. But if we could, we'll raise hands, and then when I call on you, if you could just stand up at your place, I think that will suffice for this evening. And I'll also ask, we've got a 20-ish people online. We haven't heard from them yet, so I'll ask, if we could start, if people want to start hitting raise hand buttons, I'll just know if people want to talk online, and we'll make sure that we phase in our online friends as well. So, Marion, if you want to go next, you could stand up and,
sit down.
yeah, come on, yeah. You don't have to stand in.
So, thank you for the presentation. Marion Labo, local borough. Thank you for the information on how the repairs have been made and the well pump efficiency and affects our total water consumption. That's very encouraging. The other number was rather terrifying, although I'm sure that based on the vintage of our system and the vintage of most of the water utility systems in the area, that's probably not that unlikely. Unfortunately, I imagine that our connection to New Jersey American Water has been, we've been paying a lot, all those leaks have basically been smashed out the door to New Jersey American Water.
Yep.
Because I took a look at the Pennington Borough, Pennington's water rates and Rocky Hill's water rates, and they're comparable or slightly lower than New Jersey. I started scratching my head, and it's like, well, they have well service utility, just like we are. What's the major difference between things? I'm sure it's not the vintage of the system, because Rocky Hill has, their infrastructure plan just like we do. They have water mains, they have to take care of their water tower, all of that is expensive, except we have New Jersey American Water, and so.
There is one big difference. They have 4 operating wells. They have no arsenic problem. They have no radionuclide problem. And until now, they haven't had to treat for PFAS, and they will.
Rocky Hill has one well.
I know. Pennington has 4 operating wells.
I was talking about Rocky Hill at the moment, but that's.
Sorry. All right.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Pennington.
I did mention both of them. I said
Yes.
their water rates were similar to.
Not exactly, but they're, we had 4 operating wells.
Yeah.
We now have 1.
I do understand that. Yeah.
But that is all from naturally occurring issues that we had no control over. And this is why we've been buying water from New Jersey American for 16 years.
One other factor, just to, and then, just as when one looks at these other budgets, so Pennington, they're about a $1.1 million budget. They pass through $100,000 as a surplus budget into that, to the regular operating budget.
Yeah.
Trenton Waterworks, I'm not gonna give you the number, it is unconscionable, in my mind, particularly because they serve other municipalities. We, again, and kind of baked into this, unfortunately, are the opposite. We don't take a surplus. We actually, so, and as Pennington, apologies for just both of us reverting to Pennington, because I think we've looked at that more recently, but in addition to those technical differences with Pennington, and again, we continue to talk to them and try to understand how we can be closer to New Jersey Americans rates or theirs, or what the differences are. Another one, though, is just that they're, even in that rate, they're taking cash in. So it's actually worse.
I do think looking back at our budgets from like 5 to 6 years ago, we also had about a surplus of $100,000 in our water budget, which has been rapidly declining until we hit the point of being in the negative. So, I mean, at some point in time, we were a little closer to of having some operational surplus. That's not like it never happened. It used to happen. I did want to ask my little nerdy question. What type of filtration system are we looking at in the grant?
Ooh,
Whatever. Well,
The filtration system, what type of filtration system?
oh, filtration system. It's,
Or the ion?
it's an ion exchange process. It's not granulated activated carbon, but we haven't spec'd. I mean, what was done for cost estimation, initial purposes, was basically, it's a, specific ion exchange process, not as opposed to granular activated carbon, although, granular activated carbon apparently advantages, it also is effective for a lot of other things, but currently, we have an airstrip run well number 4 for tetrachloroethylene, which is from an unknown source, very low level. We don't need to address it with that. So, but actually, when we had our discussion with Suburban Engineers, when we brought them in to develop not the specs, but basically the engineer's estimate for our grant application, they said, you could go either way. We'll see what the EPA says, but and in terms of space requirements, I think they're about the same.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, either system is capable of getting down to, non-detect levels and meeting the new.
Not
maximum
even
standard.
just the ion exchange.
Right.
I think when it's sort of about May, and we have non-detectable levels, and they're one operating.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding from people who've put in these systems all over the place is it's not a big lift to get down to 2 parts per trillion pretty much across the board with those. So,
One minor little thing here,
Yeah.
that I'm sitting down.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that we're talking to the iBank and NJDEP grants. Have we looked into NJ Future funding? Because I do believe they also have something out there for water specifically, if you go through their webpage. And then also technically, although this, we're certainly not as rural as we used to be, but considering that Hopewell Borough, and most of Hopewell Township and lots of other places, north and west Princeton are still on well water, we technically qualify for USDA rural grants and loans.
Yep.
So I was wondering if we had looked into those 2 avenues of financing yet, because once again, you've mentioned the iBank and NJDEP, but not the other 2 specific.
we've certainly discussed the USDA, our Matt Mulhall, our hydrogeologist. He's actually also worked for Rocky Hill, and he said, that's the source that they use for their treatment system. So that's certainly a possibility. iBank, we've had discussions with them. The problem with iBank, well, there are these nano loans that are available up to, I believe it's $2 or $2.5 million, potentially with 50% principal forgiveness. And we're eligible for those. Unfortunately, we're not eligible for, there are loans that are set aside with principal forgiveness for lead service line replacement, but we don't meet the income criteria, which is perfectly understandable because there are communities that do and they need that money. But unfortunately, we've had 2 or 3 different discussions with iBank just to go through all those.
And admittedly, for New Jersey Future, we'll look specifically too, but when we have these discussions with DEP, I'm not gonna say that they're like our concierge, but they are always, even the iBank folks are always kind of they're not competitors, but they're trying to, it's like, well, this doesn't work, but we'll talk to the legislature about this, or this doesn't work, but so-and-so has this program. And I'd be lying if I said I remember New Jersey Future coming up, but it is that type of relationship where we meet with them every so while and they go through the list with us. But I don't recall New Jersey Future, and we'll make sure that is.
All money is good.
Yes.
Thank you. No, that's another avenue to explore, certainly.
Just a quick question, Gigi Armstrong, Hopewell Borough. I've been reading about a 2-year pilot program that's been going on for the removal of PFAS. It addresses arsenic, but it's I think it was just completed and it was successful and it seems like it's something very new. Have you heard about this?
But perhaps without further detail, I don't know that I
That's
had.
Curry and New Hope.
Right.
It was in the Bucks County Courier.
I mean, the short answer is, sounds excellent, you know, the PFAS, I don't mean to say PFAS is not a concern, it shouldn't be a concern of anyone, but ultimately that's of the places where ducks are in a row, you know, PFAS is pretty solidly in that corner, you know, and on one hand, if the community were to decide to privatize, they would take care of it, and that's one where we've got a pretty solid commitment for the grants, whatever the technology is. DEP and EPA will pay for it for us, thankfully, in that category.
Hopefully, yeah, but that said, I mean, if there's another treatment process that's less expensive and equally effective, I mean, at this point, we're not wedded to anything. We're really just trying to secure the grant to do it.
Susan?
Hi, Susan Borough. So just like clarification, so did you get the New Jersey DEP grant for 2.34 million or not? I'm confused.
So,
Because it seems like you're saying you didn't, but the way you're kind of saying.
We haven't, but we're hoping. Can I, yeah, I mean,
that's fine.
where it is the money is federal money that comes from EPA. It's administered through DEP. So the application goes through DEP.
Understood.
So we filed that application. That was back in February. They came back with some questions. They met with EPA. EPA had a couple of questions. We answered the questions. They went back to EPA. And that's where it is. It's back in EPA's court. So nothing has happened in terms of an answer from EPA, yes or no. And we are in touch with the DEP, and in fact, we'll probably be meeting with them again in August, probably in the middle of August, just to update and find out what's going on. A, have you heard anything from EPA? Do they have any questions? And you know, they also want to know what's happening with us in terms of where we're going, possible sale or not. At this point, that process is moving forward.
Okay, so then I misheard you say we
Well,
secured it. Like
let me, I'll apologize for being most of what we're talking about tonight is our cost assumptions. And
Right.
from my perspective, we are assuming that money is coming in when we think about what our rates are. So apologies for being, there is some risk there. And honestly, if we don't get that, you know, what looks like a doubling the rates and $8.7 million capital is like 11 million.
Okay, okay, so then another point of clarification, because there's so much misinformation that sort of flies around. Is it what it was said at the last water meeting that we pay the retail rate for American Water? Like, what do people mean by that?
Okay.
And would we not pay the retail rate if, like, can you explain a little bit about that?
Okay, so.
Or maybe a yes or no, do we pay the retail rate?
Well, it's almost a yes or no, but it's very, if you look at, there's this tariff, which is a 125-page document that they have all their rates for different areas in New Jersey, America, across the state. And there are two rate schedules, and one is general metered sale for resale, which is what we pay. And if we were a bigger municipality, we get a better rate. If you look at the rates on that, and you look at the rates that they charge for residential users, are exactly the same. And the reason is that to basically qualify for a discounted rate, we have to use, I think it's 500,000 gallons a day. It's a lot more than we ever use. So basically, in effect, we pay the same rate as you would pay if you were just down the street as a homeowner. We don't get a break.
Is that your understanding, Ryan? Because it's been said in different ways.
So-
that we pay a higher rate because we pay the retail.
So, let me think of this a little more. First up, just for those, and I'll, including those following at home. I don't know if they've ever explained this. So the tariff, that is the document that the private water company files with the Board of Public Utilities that lists what all their rates are. All the public utilities, PSE&G has one that says electricity costs this much, or like a street lamp costs X dollars. It's their filing with the government about what all their rates are. There are separate categories for things that sound like bulk water purchasers that we are under, and categories for just regular residential folks with a meter. It turns out that those numbers, those rates for us and for John Smith, who lives just up the road in Montgomery, per gallon are exactly the same. They're technically different categories, but because we don't buy enough water, the rate is the same. So we sometimes maybe inartfully call that the retail rate because it's the same as just what a regular house would pay
Yeah.
per gallon. Technically, the tariff says it is the bulk purchase rate, but it happens to be the same per gallon as what just a homeowner pays for their regular meter at their home.
Yeah, they put general metered service sale for resale, and then on the next tariff for the homeowner, it just takes the resale word off and it's the same thing, so it's the same.
So
we
we're,
shouldn't be concerned when we hear people say, well, we did weird negotiations with the last administration and are locked into these retail rates instead.
no, I,
If you just clarify that sort of misinformation, if it's misinformation or misunderstanding how it's being presented.
so if I think I follow, it's perhaps that maybe there was some maybe missed opportunity to pay a better rate, perhaps, that, yeah, okay, that's, I don't know if I've heard it presented that way.
We've
But-
tried,
Yes,
and unsuccessfully. I mean, I think we've tried to get a better rate, and so far we haven't been able to do it, because again, that there is a rate schedule that is less expensive, but there's a minimum quantity that we can't possibly meet to be eligible for that. So over the years, I know Michelle Hoban had made several attempts to, sit down with those guys and say, can you give us a better, can you basically give us that rate that you would give to a larger municipality? And they said, nope.
and ultimately,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and while there may be an opportunity, or perhaps was an opportunity to try to negotiate something directly, ultimately, what they charge us is a number they put in this tariff document that's approved by BPU. So we can try to talk to them and have, but ultimately it's, we don't directly have a say in it. They don't have to come to us for permission to charge a certain rate or anything like that.
Rachel Bourne from Borough. So I'm really hoping you clarify this part for me, because I'm getting a little confused. I'm hearing words from the community that this is short-sighted, that this is all short-sighted. But then I came to a council meeting, I think it was in March, and the discussion came up and a lot of small businesses were there, and they were pleading because they're the ones getting the biggest hit. And like Peasant Grill, I remember, was there, and Chubby's was there, and Autoburger was there, the laundromat that I was like championing for. And I'm just curious, as this goes on, who's bearing this cost on whether we sell or we don't sell? Is it the residents? Is it the businesses? Just looking for clarification.
That is one area where the town does have some discretion. We had a pretty lively discussion about it when we did our rates this year, and the same thing last year. So in 2023, when we had to do an increase, there was a lot of discussion, and what I heard out of that was the importance of protecting our smallest users, our most vulnerable population financially, right? Those most in need, small apartments, housing units, that type of thing, where we don't have discretion, and stop me, guys, when we're wrong here, but we can do all the things we can to try to bring our costs down. But at the end of the day, we get a series of bills at the end of the year, and that's what we have to divide up amongst us. Our current rate structure is tiered towards the big users, in that they pay, not, I don't, disproportionate is not the right, but we baked into our rate system, forgetting the overall costs. When our rates were better 2 years ago, our budget was in the $650,000 range. When we did this really difficult increase, it brought us up to $850,000 per year. What we're looking at as we go forward, 1.1, 1.2 to $1.8 million of costs per year. But what we do have control is how we allocate that amongst our users. We have, let's say until now, like we're going to change immediately, but our focus had been the smallest users, the people who could least afford to live here, and to look at the bigger users because it's a quantity thing, perhaps to incentivize people to use less water. That's part. That is something we can control. At the moment, it is honestly, in my mind, unfair to everyone, perhaps except the smallest of the small users. I don't personally have a issue with that. I'm in the camp of, you know, working to protect them. Once you get above that level, it is maybe not uniformly unfair to everyone. But in my mind, that's where we are for me.
Mayor Kennedy, isn't it fair to say that everyone bears the cost?
Everyone, yeah, no, it does. It does.
Yeah, everyone bears the cost, but if I just could add, so. You know, we have a rate structure that's, as I said, more complex than the one that, for example, New Jersey American and the other big utilities, they have a monthly fee and they have a cost per 1,000 gallons. So if you're using a lot, that monthly fee gets kind of absorbed. And that's why that curve, does this, it drops. Our curve, you notice, is almost horizontal, like everybody's paying about the same amount for 1,000 gallons. It's because we've structured it that way. But it means that if you're a business that uses a lot of water, you're paying a substantial amount more than you would be under these other scenarios. I'll also add, so there are a couple of elements to this, and all of it is just painful because there's no good answer. You could say, well, a business can pass on the cost to their customers. Well, they can't pass that cost on an unlimited basis. I mean, if there are limits to all those things. The other say, well, if you're a family, you can't pass your cost off to anybody, you're just absorbing the cost. So do you shift some of that cost onto residential users to provide some relief to the businesses? Or do the businesses, and no matter which way you move it, somebody's getting hurt. And my fear, honestly, just my personal fear is that we're creating a situation where for businesses, it's just unaffordable. And it's the last thing we want to do for restaurants and so on. So there's no magic answer to it. I have agonized over different rate structures. You can shift these things around, but one way or the other, you're going to put it on the back of someone else. So I'm going to say I'm not happy with the way our rate structure is, but we haven't found a better solution.
Just the question you had on rate structures, has there been a discussion of a voluntary program where people can pay more for their water in the summer? So when you pay, when you pay, when you use a gallon of water, when you get charged $1 for the water, and you get charged $1 for the sewer. A lot of gardeners and gardeners in Hopewell Borough rather keep the garden beautiful by spraying water on the yard. Right now, if we get an excess of water, right, that we will buy from American, New Jersey, whatever. A lot of utilities have this program where gardeners can use their winter sewer bill for the summer. And I would definitely, I'd sign up for it and maybe pay like a quarter more for my water, because I'm not paying the sewage fee for it, right? And I'll spray more on the yard and whatever and keep the garden beautiful. You guys will make more money out of it. It's not costing the sewer anything because it's getting sprayed on my begonias. It evaporates, right? And so once you have an excess of water, which it's just coming out of the well, it's not costing any more sort of marginal cost, but it'll make the yards look nicer. It'll get you guys more money. Maybe it'll be a win-win.
So two things I heard there, and I think both good ideas. One of them, with bigger users, so for water and sewer, the assumption is what comes out goes back in. That's how we allocate sewer. Bigger users do have metered sewer, and that kind of idea that a big water user might not use a lot of sewer for a sewer meter thing makes sense. We can look into, as long as at the end, our requirement for allocating money amongst us, or the cost amongst us, is that we be self-liquidating. Now, at the end of the year, from both a cash flow perspective, every month we have enough money to pay the bills, and that we cover the costs at the end of the year. Those are the obligations. And and I know some private utilities, usually in electricity, have more or energy, have the ability to kind of estimate and even out your payments over the year, so that your gas bill in the winter is not crazy, and then $1 in the summer that could be evened out. That's interesting. We could certainly look at things like that.
It's not even so much even in the payments of it, it's the fact that, I use a ton of water and it doesn't go down the sewer, and I'm paying for the sewer, right? But essentially, you can actually, rather than having a sewer meter or whatever, you can get that data point from what went in the sewer in the winter and just use that number for my summer bill. And then I, happily pay more for my water that comes, so it's for residential people. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Struck with the pain to get more money.
Like the sound of that.
So then we'll do, Lynn next, perhaps?
Lynn Ferrugia, Chevy's. So our bill, and I didn't separate out sewer from water. The last bill, not this most recent one, the last one was 2748. This newest one was 6422. It was a big jump. And of course it was hot and people want water to drink and, we served everybody. But, so my concern is with however we do this, how do we plan for this? I didn't expect it to be that high, but certainly I have to, budget for that kind of increase. And I'm just curious about how we see it in the next year. Is this gonna be my regular bill? Should I just plan on that?
Yes.
Okay. That helps. And I really appreciate you guys talking about it, honestly, there aren't that many businesses in town.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for the people who are on the low, that we're concerned about in the apartments, who are gonna get passed on at the laundromat, their washing machine, as they do their laundry is gonna get increased, so they're gonna pay it. Even though we're not charging them as much, perhaps in their water bill, they're gonna get it at the laundromat. I imagine that laundromat and Chubby's is spending the most for the water in town.
And they don't have a lot of flexibility over it.
Exactly.
And that's a vital service for this community, that laundromat.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
So while, unfortunately, the answer to the question is yes. The one thing that's kind of given between this year and next is that our costs will go up from a budget perspective, between this year and next.
Mhm.
There's a commitment, I think, from us to constantly revisit, not just the cost cutting things, but the allocation. There's no magic to that, but we will have that discussion and weigh this every year as a community to see how we are allocating. And I don't think we'll come to an answer. It's like, let's put it all in the small users, but there are ways, as we analyze this, to revisit the allocation part. But I think unfortunately, the assumption to make is it's not gonna go down.
Yeah, I don't know about the business office call for the state of New Jersey, the small business people like me, maybe they have grants for businesses. I haven't looked into it yet, but if communities are, passing along that cost to small businesses, it's gonna be hard to stay in business, or make it sustainable. I was shocked, actually. That's a lot of money. So if you guys hear of any grants, let me know. Anyone in this audience here, grants, let me know. Thank you.
All right, Paul?
All your. First of all, I want to thank David Mackey on the research and data that he put together. And having said that, that's the kind of detail.
Yeah.
That's the kind of detail one would want. Let's say your town had a major redevelopment plan, there's an increase of population of 18%. That's the kind of detail. Now let's bring it back to the water. So water, you have an 18% hypothetically increase in your residential units. What does that do to a water system? For small town, question one. Question two, I have the friends in the fire. They tell me water, horrible. See what tanker. That was one of somebody Titusville comes to visit us, Princeton, and Rocky Hill, whatever comes to for a fire. They're using the tanker trucks because they say the pressure isn't good or there isn't enough water. I think that's true. But my question is, what in terms of a water perspective, when you talk about increase in redevelopment, how does that?
Well, I can tell you that since 2006, when we started purchasing water from New Jersey American, so I mentioned I did a retrospective analysis going all the way back because I was trying to understand the leaks and everything else. And in the process of that, I was looking at our metered usage going back to 2006. So there's actually, and I had that graph and I took it off my slide deck. There's a 15% drop in metered usage that we're seeing since in the last 18 years, which could be attributed, well, but I'm going to caution you, it could be attributed to a couple of things. One, better water conservation, right? People using low flow toilets, different shower heads and so on. That's probably part of it. It could also be partly related to meters that are under registering as they age. So that's the cautionary part. Do we have to look, and it's another thing, actually, it wasn't even on our list, but Doug's looking into the cost of new meters because but so that only answers your question partially. But based on what our current usage is and based on what the production of those two wells would be certainly, and actually the combined production between well number 4 and the interconnection, we certainly have enough supply. But it's, yeah, but that 15% we need to figure out because it literally, it's like a straight line regression that I did and I'm, wow, 15% is a lot over that period of time. But it just fell out of the analysis. It's one of those things you learn, but just the short version, you know, I'm not good at short versions, is we have the capacity. But
I don't know if I can answer the earlier part of the question, but we have a constant dialogue with our fire commissioners, our fire professionals. And I'll be honest, I'm new to sitting in on those meetings, but I've never heard anything like that from a concerned perspective.
And we have plenty of pressure. We're
Yeah.
125 PSI. That's one of the reasons why when we get a leak, we get a leak. That's why we were losing 20,000 gallons from that little skinny line. So there's plenty of pressure. The water's hard, which we all know, because we all have to clean out our dishwashers and so on. But as far as I know from a fire, that's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, me too, but it doesn't mean it will be looked into further. But
Ethan Unick, so I was curious, like in terms of the roadmap decision and those, are there like any hard deadlines for decisions that need to be made like over the next 6 months, year? And, you know, I mean, first, I actually want to commend you guys for all your efforts. I really feel sincerity coming from you. I get the sense, like, you know, beyond all the details that you guys are really full steam ahead trying to explore, as Brian said, just turning over every stone to try to address the problem. And I also understand too that a lot of this, probably just to leave it in vague terms, was a problem that landed on your laps and didn't necessarily originate with you. So I commend you for all your efforts. So first question is like, what are the deadlines in terms of the decisions that need to be made? And then also second question would be like, what can town people do to sort of help out in this process, whether it's just, you know, ideas or any kind of community involvement to try to help you guys in solving the issue.
sure.
And I would assume it seems unanimous to try to keep it within the town's possession so that we can determine, you know, kind of control our destiny.
So, I mean, first I'll say, again, I'm speaking for myself. We want that too. I want that too.
Yeah.
You know, and when we talk about options, it's just having, for me, valid comparison points. You know, I can't in my mind say selling makes sense or doesn't make sense until we can actually calculate and say, company X is going to give us Y and I'm committed to have our rates be Z.
Mhm.
You know, and until we have that comparison, we have guesses. But I want to know what they would do and want to be able to talk to them. And there's no rush to that. But that for me is the first data point that I find to be relevant in the go, no go decision. And to get to that point, there is months and months of work ahead of us. So under the WIPA process, we would be, if that's the route we go, we would be at the earliest in the coming months, putting together an RFQ. Request for qualifications. That's an option where we go out and we can vet who is qualified to even be in the game or in the run. And the hope is that there will be lots of qualified, you know, between like a Trenton Waterworks or New Jersey American or who knows what. We do know, but hopefully it's many. After that, it is hopefully a process that's called an RFP, request for proposals, where we develop and council has to, I believe, approve putting out the, when I say the for sale sign, this is the list of things that we are looking for back from someone. And the things that I hope it's understood that we find to be important are not just how much money would you give us, which not that money's not important. It's that our concern, what caused us to look this hard is that our rates right now and looking forward are not affordable. So in the things that are important to us that we want back from a proposal from a qualified company, it's, I guess, how much money you give us. We would do great things with the money. I'm not saying that that's not important, but it's how long can you restore us to the rates that the rest of the world pays? And how long can you keep us there? And then the third part, and it's questionable how much we can actually negotiate this or get this from a commitment. But, some valid points were made about, a regulated utility and, the rest of the world, the Princeton, and the Montgomerys, they live this and on their list of complaints, talk to your neighbors there. I do a lot of work in Princeton. There are complaints about New Jersey American when you need to do a hydrant test. I'll be honest with you, it's when you're developing a property in Princeton, Princeton makes you hire New Jersey American to test the flow of a hydrant before you can submit an application. They're not very fast at that. I've heard that. But when you ask, to be honest with you, someone in Hopewell Township or Lawrence or Ewing, about water service, they might have a lot of negative things to say, so, and they're served by Trenton Waterworks, and I'm gonna withhold my feelings about, some of the way they operate, if I can. But ultimately, that third leg is service. So can we get commitments that X is going to be reconstructed, that Y, I don't know, response times or something like that? While yes, they're governed by the Board of Public Utilities to be responsive like Verizon or PSE&G is. As someone said, that's not the end all. That's not the end all of protection, right? So what we would look for in developing this document to then go out to the world after we've qualified some people is identifying the things that are important to us so that they could be reflected back to us in a proposal. And from a technical perspective, to get to that point, there is some bizarre technical requirement that it be published in the newspaper like every week for 6 weeks. Or so they're built into even this not very fast, frankly, time period that we envision after this to develop these documents are these pieces of the government control that require, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know who it helps anyone other than a newspaper to publish something in the newspaper 6 times locally and then once in some kind of trade journal. But that takes a month and a half to even just do that. So then we've put that out there, hopefully come proposals back. Under the process we'd like to use, there's some flexibility. And what we think is important to our community is to not just get those proposals, one of which might say, we'll give you $10 million, but we're not doing anything with your rates. Well, that's perhaps a lot of value to our town, but we would really want to go back, just like when someone's trying to offer to buy your house, and say, well, wait a minute, here's our counter. Do this with the rates, give us less money, and enter into a negotiation with the prospective purchaser. After that, and a kind of an agreement in concept is made, then we have something to consider, both publicly, and I hope that, I can say it a lot, but that doesn't mean people believe it. But our commitment has been, we will keep sending out postcards and having these special meetings. And when we get to that point, we would discuss every element and get feedback from everyone about which things on those list of things that we could possibly get. Money to retire debt or lower taxes or do other important things in town, rate commitments to lower them to where the rest of the world is and for how long. We would get that and then have something to talk about. So it's a long time before we would get to that. I threw out a year before. It's multiple months to develop those documents, approve it by council, do the publications, get it out there to even get responses.
Yeah.
But that's the timeline we envision, and on top of that, there's a chance that it would go to referendum as well. That would either be, we understand, either before or after that, and not really hopefully not meaningfully add to the time to get to those things, but ultimately whether it's approved by the voters, in addition to the vetting that we will do publicly when we have something to show. That's the first opportunity I feel that we have a meaningful, I mean, there's lots of to discuss before that. I don't mean that, things will pause, we'll stop doing these meetings or stop talking, but the real question for me is what that possible scenario looks like and how to compare it to what we think our lives will look like under this scenario. And when we get to that point, we'll take both of those things and meet up back here, or on Zoom and talk it through. And I'm hopeful it's gonna be really good. If it's not, then it's not even gonna be worth it.
I've been looking into sustainability because we're in the middle of climate change. What kind of a system, municipality owned or privately owned, gives us the flexibility to handle things like the Hurricane Floyds and the crazy kinds of weather situations that we are having and unfortunately will probably continue to have?
That's an excellent question. Again, I don't know if those types of costs, so I think on one hand, and this is just me thinking out loud, to be honest with you. You've got the reliability aspect of things like, are your pump stations got backup generators and lifted up above flood areas and things like that? Those, when you see PSE&G, for example, building their substations, go up Carter Road, you see those fortresses and those extra costs. And I don't know that we are better prepared to do that ourselves than the private industry is, to be totally honest with you. But it's something that would need to be factored in to our planning, perhaps is.
Well, we've talked about it actually, and it came up actually when we were sort of scoping the design for the grant application for the two well houses. In particular, because well number 6 is actually within a flood hazard area. It's not in a flood plain, but it's within a flood hazard area. And actually the well house itself, when it was built, they actually raised the elevation of the grade. It's a little bit above. But if we were going to put a treatment building there, we would, there's all sorts of complicated permitting things that go with that, but also with it, and really the term is not even so much sustainability, but resilience, right? Your ability to, so recognizing that what was considered a 100-year frequency floodplain statistically is no longer 100 years. So that's an issue, and also having emergency generators are actually not that expensive. It's like, I think for number 6 for that treatment system, and maybe for 4, we threw those into the estimate. It's like $50,000 each. It's not that much. And it's something we've talked about for years. I mean, right now, if we have a big tropical storm coming up the coast, we have an arrangement, I think it's with Williamson Electric, where they bring in a trailer generator for well number 4. And we have a I'm getting tired of losing my words, a transfer switch, sorry, big heavy one for that. So we have, but we don't own the generator. But anyway, but these are all absolutely critical things. But fortunately, they're not, for the most part, they're much easier to design into something when you're building it, which is what we would do if we had that treatment system. But some of those things you can add after the fact. And yes, we've had a lot of discussion about that.
Because I did with Montgomery Township during Floyd, and there were that seemed to be prolonged. And it wasn't just because of our area, it was
Right.
because far away, they hadn't done whatever, and so it took a while before we had usable water.
Right, well,
And
it's,
that was New Jersey American Water.
yeah, no, because these it's very interesting because years ago, I mean, one of the things that can't say enough good about Dave Meisler, but when Hurricane Floyd, if you were here for that was 12 inches of rain in 12 hours. And in those days, we were still using a cistern up in at Burton Avenue, and that had these vents that were about this high above the ground, and that whole area flooded. And Dave, shut everything off before the water ever got in the cisterns. We never had to boil water. Oh, well, but I think there have been times when there's been one outside and he knows about it and shuts off the interconnection, and we go and I mean, that's, yeah, these are all important, and it's only going to get more complicated. All you have to do is think about Henry and Ida, what happened and how it came out of nowhere to realize that.
Okay, I got some questions. Who are you? I'm Richard Zach from Moray, LLC. We do pasta. Christmas weekend, actually. We have a wholesale business, we have a retail business.
We started retail business in February, beginning of the approved. And I came from South Brunswick, so I'm paying over 4 times. Now I know, in business, you pay for what you have, what you need, and cost of doing business. This water thing to me is really. One question I have, not having any history in the borough, you said you had 4 wells. You have 1 working now. Maybe another one could come online. What happened to the other 2?
And so the 2 wells that were the biggest producers, which were up at our Burton Avenue facility, they both had, there was a change in the drinking water standards for radionuclides, specifically uranium and radium, starting to lose my words. Basically, both wells, which were sort of nearly side by side in a different formation from where our current wells are, exceeded the standard. So we had to look at whether we could actually afford to treat that water or not. So we did a whole extensive pilot study. We actually brought in 2 different companies to do it, to look at treatment technologies, and then you do a sort of small scale version so that you can figure out the cost per gallon of actually treating it. And in that particular case, the decision was, it was just not affordable relative to buying water from New Jersey American, because mostly when you're treating radionuclides, there's waste disposal issues, and I won't bore you with all the implications. But so the decision was to abandon those wells. Those wells are sealed. So that was actually what required us to actually pay for the interconnection. Simultaneously, New Jersey American was extending their service down 518 to Kings Path right next door because they had water quality, water contamination issues, and the DEP was, anyway. So it got us within 300 feet. So that's why we lost those 2 wells. Then, and that was about 2006. Prior to that, well number 6 in the park, they changed the standard for arsenic from 50 parts per billion to 5 parts per billion. And that well, which we didn't use much, it was mostly there as a backup for droughts, had to be taken offline. And again, we did the same thing. We did a whole series of pilot studies on it. At least at the time, it wasn't affordable to treat, in part because we would have had to discharge the backwash to the Stony Brook Sewerage Authority. It's a long story, and they wouldn't take it. So no fault of theirs. So basically 3 wells were taken out of service because of treatment issues that we basically couldn't afford. And that's why when we were having our discussions with the NJDEP about well number 4, which is our currently active well, I actually was just singing the whole song about, well, we used to have 4 wells, and then suddenly we had 2, and then we had this other one, and they said, well, we think we can put a package together for you that would actually fund treatment for PFAS on both wells, and we think we can get you money to do arsenic as well on well number 6 and bring it back online. How about that? And we said, amen to that. So that's why we're going down that path. But, in the old days, before all those things hit us, it was a lot cheaper to produce water here, and we never had to purchase it from anywhere else.
Is there any other avenue to dig a new well? Or?
We looked at that too. And so the trick with that is, with this naturally occurring stuff, is there's no way of getting away from it. You can, to a degree, in the sense that there are different intervals within the formation that have higher and lower arsenic numbers. We had bad luck with both. The problem is the cost of doing that. You could easily spend a couple of $100,000 putting in a new test well and doing all the testing, only to find out that you'd have to treat it anyway. And so there was quite a lot of risk with that. So that's why we haven't gone down that path. The other thing is, and we have looked at, there are some places you do it, but again, you're really rolling the dice. But this.
Just wondering, that cost versus what you're talking about projected for the future.
Well, right, but I mean, in this case, having that, if we get the grant for the treatment systems for both wells, are able to put well 6 back online, we're now meeting our supply without buying from New Jersey American. So that's a huge driver. Yeah, there's some maintenance cost on those treatment systems, but it's substantially better than where we're and it produces enough supply. But that's aside from all the other capital items that I listed up there, right? I left that out of that $8.7 million. I'm assuming, for the time being that we're actually gonna get the grant. Those other items in terms of mains, that's just age of the system. I mean, we have lines that are over 100 years old that have to, and again, some that are less than 100 years old, that just have to be repaired. We don't have to do it all at once.
Right.
But if we're gonna be in for the long haul, we have to do it. We can't let it accumulate any longer. And honestly, in the end, it comes down to this question, in my view: can we find a scenario where we can meet our capital needs, do the work that we need to do, produce this water at a price that is sustainable in the sense of our businesses can survive? If we can't do that, and selling the system provides substantial rate relief to our customers, I think we have to look at it very seriously. I mean, and it's not saying that we've thrown in the towel, but you know, the point of that whole analysis that we did was to say, if we're thinking about keeping the system, or, you know, if we're not gonna sell it, we need to have a realistic idea of what it costs going forward to do all this. And that's what we're trying to do, is get as best a handle as we can on it. Does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah, understand.
A bit long-winded.
Another thing, kind of side with Shelby.
Yeah.
She's talking about grants. I know you get grants for repairs, new systems, and whatnot. Just curious if you can help us get a grant to, cover some of this burden to the residents and the businesses.
Well, I'll say we'll continue looking. I have had extensive discussions with our liaisons at the governor's office about what resources they have for kind of emergency support. Making that pitch, I don't mean to say it was deaf ears, but we'll continue to do that. You know, the lots of ways to kind of, you know, I'm not talking about fixing leaks, but plug a hole necessarily. The problem is that it's not necessarily, it's both not a one-time thing, and will continue to escalate. But the types of funding sources that I've been asking for, you know, special legislative grants or allocations, things like that. It's not that we don't meet the criteria, but they tend to want to have something when they're done. You know, the shiny new building, the completed bridge, and those kind of requests are less attractive than other people's. Our request for rate relief, you know, or tax relief, frankly, is less attractive than another, I'll say, a town that is less advantaged, you know. So we on top of all of this, when you look at these grant applications and we apply, or grant programs, many of them, while we are have serious affordability issues across the board in our town, it's not looked that way necessarily from Trenton when you're comparing a community like Trenton or somewhere else. And a lot of the grant programs are stepped. So while we try, some of those pitches are more challenging, trying to be respectful to the ones who respond to me, and not necessarily cryptic, but we'll continue to make those pitches. And if there's anything possibly, we'll share and continue to make those asks, both generally, please give us a pot of money for X with the repairs or just relief. Or if there are specific individual small business association, the county economic development office, for example, anything like that, we'll come back to you guys and we'll share it. Thus far, though, it's been, I wish I had better information to share.
So now you're saying that businesses basically are going to be paying more. So, okay, there were a lot of different restaurants in there before we went in there. We are currently running. We're doing wholesale business. I have a closed loop system, my water cooler and extruders. And it'd be cool when you're extruding pop. So I did a closed loop system because Clark told me that money for the water is gonna wait. Took care of that.
Okay.
So we aren't using water there. We're washing a few dishes and making some sauce. So, my question to you is, how my bill figured, was it on past allocations to the other restaurants that were working there? Burger, Greek Bites, wherever they were? They had open restaurant?
So I'll start to answer that question and then offer to complete it offline, because there's a couple of factors there. Some of them are property specific. You know, someone else brought to us another user who's confusingly, they had the opposite problem, where they thought they did, that their bill's the same, it should have been higher. It turns out that was unfortunately the case, I wish it were. But on an individual basis, we can look to see, you know, with and when we say allocating to the businesses, what we really mean though is that the businesses happen to be the heavy water users. It's not that there's a different rate for a commercial user or for a business necessarily so much as our.
I would like you to put a number on that. I mean, how many gallons do you consider a heavy use? That would be great for me.
So I think I mean, honestly, it's really just proportional to usage.
It is, so, okay, the rate structure, so there's a fixed fee that everybody pays for the first 2,000 gallons. And then I guess the next bid is 2,000 to 5,000 gallons. There's a series of bins, if you will, you know, 10 to 20,000 gallons, 20 to 30,000 gallons and above. And the rates are different in those. So it's a bit like your taxes, you know, where you pay a certain amount for that first bit of income, and then there's that sort of incremental amount. But the rate, it escalates as you get into the higher numbers. I mean, I don't have it right in front of
I'm
me.
just saying, I haven't been in that long.
No, but I mean, well, how much, could I say, do you remember how many gallons you use in a quarter? I mean, 10, 20 or?
I mean, I just got the last bill. I looked at the meter to make sure it's like in the ballpark, so I know the meter is working. But, I don't have that number right now.
Okay, no, I'm just curious, but I mean, so, I mean, a typical household might use between 5 and 10 or even 20,000 gallons. There are some restaurants that use 100 or 125,000 gallons a quarter, a lot more. They're washing a lot of dishes and they're doing it on the lid. You tell me, right? I think the laundromat uses about 125,000, you know. So those would be the higher users. It's a relatively small number of people, but a lot of gallons. I'm not sure where you fit in all that, but one thing, whenever you have a question about your bill, just do not hesitate to call the borough, and we can.
And we know what it's on because you've got a delicious product, but we'll figure out there are several factors in what you're asking. One of them just may be specific to your meter, your business, whether,
Right.
you know, and that part of it we'll help figure out.
Absolutely.
No, that's probably not fair, but we'll help you figure it out.
I mean, it's fair to me.
Understand, yeah.
Sure. So.
Peggy Millennius, just sit up there, but I'm just speaking as a resident. We talked a lot about the way the burden is borne by the businesses more than the residents, not by intention, and so how can we make that you know, more fair. And so one idea is right now there's a flat fee, you know, for it sounds like, if I'm understanding this correctly, the cost of delivering the water, regardless of how much water there is, the cost of delivering the water is, you know, it stays here. Like it's high. There's the repairs, there were the rate increase that happened recently. A good portion of that was due to a leak, but then there were also improvements. I do remember when we looked at that rate increase, we were hoping that rate increase would not continue for another year. It sounds like it probably will. Another way to allocate might be to actually have a sliding scale of that base rate. So that, because if say, for example, we had, I'm just gonna use random numbers that are nice and easy to, you know. Say we had $100,000 deficit that we're trying to make up from a previous year. Or, you know, those were the improvements, instead of putting that just as a rate. If you have the lowest rate payer just paying a nominal connection fee, $5, but you actually tier the connection fee instead of the rate, you could end up with your average homeowner maybe paying a $300 connection fee and a resident annually. And a restaurant might be paying a $500 connection fee, but it sounds like the restaurant increases. I believe I spoke to the laundromat. The increase for them was like $12,000 a year, if I remember correctly.
I think the increase, their bill's about 16,000.
Okay, so it was, you know, it sounds like those numbers, there's no way, I can't see any way with the rates, just doing it as a rate, that it's going to be tenable for the businesses. And I do remember when Barry spoke from the Peasant Grill, and we were looking at that rate chart where, you know, and he said, listen, even if you didn't grade up the rates, it would still be such a massive hit to the businesses just because they have to use that much water. Like, you know, a laundromat can't use less water. Businesses could use more disposable dishes, but I don't think that that's what we want people to do.
Right.
So, if you say that delivery rate, have we thought about tiering the initial? Are you following what I'm saying? Tiering,
Not entirely. I mean, the base rates actually, one thing we don't do that a lot of people do is they do it based on the diameter of the connection. Like there's the monthly fee or the
right,
quarterly
the
fee. Yeah, but
connection
that's
fee.
usually higher. That would be higher for a business
Well,
with
it
a
would
two-inch
still, it
connection.
would be higher, but not as incrementally higher as it currently is.
Yeah, but one way or the other, and I'm not saying I'm opposed to making any changes. Don't interpret it that way.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of different ways of doing this, and if you want to remove some of the burden from the businesses, you're going to put it on other lower users. There's nowhere else to do it. And there are other scenarios that we can run. I'm not necessarily opposed to them. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that somebody else always pays. And I've never, and I'm not saying that's a reason not to change it. I mean, I think it's worth examining possible ways of getting some relief for the people that are high
I
users.
feel like if you tier that, if you tier the connection charge so that you are still protecting the lowest user and the, you know, the.
Why would you tier the connection charge and not make it based on how many gallons you use? I'm not clear.
Well, you know, you would still tier it in that way, but it would be for example, the giant rate hike that we just had this past year, which we did as a rate instead of tiering the
Well,
connection.
no, actually, it was 22% at the low end and it was about 54% at the high end.
Right.
So the actual percentage increase varied according to the
Right.
usage. You could shift that a different way, but I'm saying there's,
I'm saying, I mean, I ran numbers and it did seem like there are ways that with a change to the connection fee, because that is really, it's the cost of delivering the water. That is,
I'm just not clear.
Well,
what-
let me put it,
Lowest part of the bill.
put it this way, though. To be honest with you, the discussion we're having in here tonight is, I guess, about the potential sale of the utility. And we do have the ability independently of that to allocate our costs. You know, what we focused on is what the overall costs to the system are. Again, that could be allocated amongst us anyway, and we'll continue to talk about that, but I don't know.
well, to tie it back to the sale of the
Please.
system, I do think that right now, this past year, we've all been aware that we've all been hit with a massive water increase. That some of it is due to rate increases in New Jersey American, but some of it is also due to things that happened in the past that were beyond our control and have already happened. And so I feel like if we can address I mean, it's hard to look at a 10-year projection when you're in a crisis mode. And so if we can deal with the current rate, increase. And, you know, in a better way now, that put us in a better position to look forward 10 years in my mind.
No. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I can,
We-
we
We'll
can
keep
talk
talking.
off.
Believe me, there's lots of different ways to do
Numbers.
it.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I have a spreadsheet that lets you vary every single parameter in this, in any direction you want to go. There's, we've been through a lot of permutations, and I'm not saying we have the magic one, but there are things we can talk about.
So,
Absolutely.
not to stop anyone here in person, but we have not heard from anyone. At one point, there was a hand up online. Just a reminder, if anyone online would like to make a comment, push the raise hand button, we'll patch you in. I don't see anyone there, so we'll continue here, but.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Charlie Cradaville. Appreciate your willingness to engage and looking forward to more dialogue in the future. I'm with Food and Water Watch. I'm the Central Jersey organizer there. I'm addressing it today on behalf of our 72,000 members around the state, including many Hopewell Borough residents who we've been getting to know in the past few weeks. I had a few questions and some comments. I wanted to start by noting there was a special meeting of the council on Friday. And I saw an agenda item,
Say it again, we're meeting today and we meet on Thursday.
Right, was there a special meeting recently?
No.
Okay, must be mistaken then, I'll follow up. But I did want to ask if this meeting is being recorded and when
It
it's
is.
recording will be available.
Shortly, we have a YouTube station, so probably the next couple days.
I appreciate that,
Mhm.
and I just really appreciate the residents spending hours here and bringing up good points and raising, I think, legitimate concerns about the potential for privatization. I really appreciated your presentation, Mr. Mackey. I thought that it helped make the case against privatization. I think that, you said the $2.34 million grant application, you have to give that up if you go the privatization route. And that is really the best chance to reduce and eliminate the need to purchase water from New Jersey American, to treat the PFAS, to treat the arsenic. And you said very clearly, it's much more expensive to purchase than to produce. So I think that the borough sees the clear differences between the two paths. And
When did you say that?
I think you're missing the 8.7 million in capital needs that have nothing to do with the treatment system.
I'm not missing,
Well, I mean,
paid attention.
the way you just characterized it, it seems like it'd be smooth sailing if we get the grant for the PFAS treatment, and it's just not taking into account all the rest of the capital needs that I just explained. So, sorry, didn't interrupt you. Continue on.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to learn from you. I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm just trying to summarize some of the points that I took away as key ones. And the water supply costs are a component of the budget, and it is one that you noted was much more expensive to purchase than to produce. And you mentioned, and some folks mentioned concerns about local control, right? I think the discussion we're having now about rate structure is an example of how the borough currently has control. And that's the exact thing you would lose if you privatize, right? Being able to decide whether there's a disproportionate impact on people with lower incomes. That's something that, it should be a deal breaker, right? If you're gonna have a disproportionate income on people with lower incomes, that would be a con of doing this. But at the end of the day, what you've got is, whatever negotiations you end up with are gonna be for less than a generation, 5, 10 years, right? Once you lose control over the rate structure, it's gonna be NJ American's decision. Corporate board is gonna be deciding what direction to go. And yes, there's some regulatory apparatus. We're all aware that that's the case, but the control, the actual decision-making authority over that rate structure is gonna be removed from this room, removed from this building. And some of the things that may have been taken for granted over the years, like the person you're very happy with running your water department and the level of service that folks have become accustomed to here, could become a thing of the past. So I wanted to share those thoughts today, and I know one of the gentlemen asked about deadlines that are coming up, and I did just want to note for the record that there is the deadline August 5th for residents to petition to put the question of privatization to the public, to the voters. And so I wanted to personally say I'm really grateful for, proud of the Hopewell residents who have signed the petition to put this on the ballot. And I encourage people to sign that petition. I have copies here if anybody would like to sign it. And
So would you mind, when you're asking for these to be signed, what are you asking them to do? What is it that will happen when this document is filed?
Well, per WIPA, there's a 45-day period of time when residents can protest the potential sale and put the question to the voters. It's only happened twice.
And when, again, just when in your mind would that be?
When would the vote take place?
Yeah.
That's a great question, and I'm not certain of that because it may depend on the process, but I do know that it's not too late to place a question on the ballot for this year's election. The deadline is 50 days prior to the general election, so we're about 90 some days away. So, with the Monday deadline, the municipal clerk would have time to transmit to the county clerk would have time to place a question on the ballot. If that's the way this goes, potentially it could be on a year later or potentially somewhere in between. I'm not an expert.
But just to be clear, I know, and I appreciate that you're not, but you are asking people to sign something. So just to be clear, when you're asking them to sign something, when are you telling them, assuming that time frame, it would be on the ballot? November?
My understanding is that is what is most likely to be the case.
I mean, assuming again, it happened on time and happens to be August 9th to, or the 23rd are the two dates to transmit something to the county clerk, assuming it gets on the appropriate one, you're telling people that it would be on the November ballot? And if people sign it, that's their expectation that yes, we'd like to have a question on the November ballot.
I think the people signing want to have a vote, and the petition does not specify a date.
But what are you telling, he's asking you?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking for this, I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking people to do and make sure that you understand it.
To be
So
clear,
that they can understand.
to be clear, I help get the petition together. Hopewell residents have been circulating it to one another, and I'm not always present to hear what everyone says, but my understanding is that it's not too late to get this on the ballot this year, and if that is,
But it's, so you're with Food and Water Watch, your position, and if this was filed, that there'd be a ballot question this November if it was done timely. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes, we think so. Yeah, we think so.
Okay, again, it's unclear what you're asking people to do. I just want to make sure I understand Food and Water Watch's position about when it would be on the ballot based on what you're circulating or asking them to do.
Yeah, and just to be clear about our position, we are against privatization. We don't think there's a right.
That's fair.
We
get it. Yes.
Yeah, so if I could, we don't think there's a right way to privatize, but given that WIPA takes away the public's chance to have a vote, we chose to draft a petition and help residents, empower one another to have the vote. And
No, understood. I wanted to say on my behalf, there's no one here who doesn't want to put it to a vote. But I'm cautious, want to make sure it's understood what you're circulating and that it's consistent with our understanding of what would happen. And if it's your position that this gets filed and there's a vote in November, that's fine. I appreciate, that interpretation, and when I don't think there's going to be any opposition to that happening.
and just we're working with the same circumstances here. The deadline that's coming up is Monday, August 5th. So we sort of had to move quickly and did move quickly because we didn't want to see something happen that would be regretted later. And that's our position is that privatization is always a short-sighted thing that leads to greater costs for the ratepayers in the future. If not in 5 years, 10 years, a generation.
Again, I just appreciate that confirming your understanding of when that would happen is helpful for us. So. thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to connect you with the, attorney if you will. So, thank you. That's all.
Very good. Thank you. We do have some people online here. So I'm going to promote first Rachel. And we've got 2 people with hands raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can be do human error on the part of the mayor. We can't see you, but we can hear you, and let's proceed that way. So
That's okay.
We can't see you. That's my fault.
That's okay. So yeah, my name is Rachel Dawn Davis. Thank you first off to all the volunteers tonight. I really appreciate your dedication and time. I'm speaking as a public policy and justice organizer for Water Spirit, which is a spiritual ecology nonprofit based in Monmouth County. And I speak not just as a concerned resident, but also as someone deeply rooted in the understanding that water is a sacred gift, a vital essence that connects all life. So the prospect of privatizing our water supply is more than a policy issue. It is a threat to this sacred relationship. When water is treated as a commodity, we do risk severing a sacred bond that connects us to this essential element of life. Privatization turns water from a common good into a profit-driven enterprise. Of course, really appreciate the work that you're doing to connect with New Jersey Future, with whom we work very closely with respect to lead service line replacement, also sharing Lead-Free New Jersey, again, with whom we work very closely. There are lots of funding opportunities, really creative ways to come up with community-inspired solutions. We really do encourage you to look more into those USDA grants and other things, and if we can be of any assistance, we would love to be. And on some levels, streamlining operations and adopting cost-saving technologies can also help manage expenses without compromising service quality. There are clear inherent risks involved in privatization, such as increased costs over time, reduced access for vulnerable communities, and a potential degradation of the quality of this precious resource. Water should remain a public trust, of course, managed with the utmost respect for its sacred nature and our collective responsibility to protect it. So yeah, I of course urge you as guardians of our community and overseers of our shared future to ensure public and community involvement and solution submission as you act ideally firmly against privatization of water. Appreciate this meeting tonight. Let us honor the sacredness water provides, ensuring it remains a public good. Again, may we uphold our ecological responsibilities and our moral obligations to future generations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and again, really glad to be a resource going forward.
Thank you so much. If it's possible, I don't know, we have your email address, not to read over the phone, but ours on our website. If you want to shoot one of the 3 of us an email, love to connect.
Absolutely, would be glad to. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next hand raised person is Sean. I'm going to move, I think it's pronounced Sean, you over, and when it bounces over, you could push the camera button too. That's what kept us from seeing our last speaker. It's actually something on the user end. So there we go. Well, but we cannot hear you with apologies. So are you muted?
Yeah. Yes, I'm muted. Hi,
we can see and hear you. Oh, well done.
you think with being on Zoom all the time, you get used to it, right?
It's only 4 years of something like this, and we still haven't figured out on our
Right.
stuff. Welcome.
Thank you. I had 2 questions. It was about the WIPA process, and it came up just in that discussion we just had recently. First, on the public notice on the website that talks about the WIPA process, it talks about getting the signatures, and then it implies that it was going to be on the next election. Mayor,
were you thinking that it's not, or it's just not clear, or just haven't done the process yet?
So, I'll be honest, we timed everything that we've done thus far on the assumption that if this happened, and it's not a necessarily bad thing to happen, that it would be. The dates for, as the last speaker said, submitting for the two traditional types of referenda. The binding, I believe, is supposed to be transmitted by the 9th of August. The 23rd for the non-binding, I don't know. And trust me, I've been talking to the county clerk for the last couple of days to understand this,
Okay.
which is, but we sent our things to DEP, assuming that this, was a bad thing to happen, that it would, and that we'd be on, if it were to happen, it'd be on that date, and we kind of backed into our initial submissions and this period based on that. I asked because it seemed unclear from a lot of people I've spoken to what they thought would happen when this did. So I wanted to hear from the horse's mouth what that was deciding. So anyway.
And then the second question, maybe something that's easier to answer. So let's just say that a referendum is triggered. Does that throw us out of the WIPA process? For example, even if it was passed, do you have to go through the traditional RFP route outside of WIPA? Or if it's passed, you get to still use the flexibility in WIPA to negotiate contracts and such?
I'll be honest, I have the important thing to me for the borough is the flexibility. The WIPA wasn't chosen because it didn't have a referendum. It was because the option to go to a qualified bidder, to go to them, and then if they came to us with said, we'd like to give you a lot of money, for us to say, no, thank you, let's talk about fixing our rates or service or something like that. I'll be honest, we've had extensive discussions with our attorney, the state, and our county clerk in the last couple of days. If being in full honesty, if I felt that we would lose those tools, I would be saying something very different at this meeting.
Okay.
I don't have full confidence in that, and that is in flux. But the information I have from my attorney is that this would go on the ballot, and that we would, my hope, and if we don't, to be honest with you, it's a major problem for any prospect of rate relief, that we would still have the options of flexibility, but that voter approval would be added.
Oh, well, hopefully it's additive, but it's a consideration to think of, like, if we go through the referendum process, that we lose the ability to negotiate flexibility, because that's a component of this. So, thank you.
And frankly, the important one in my mind, and so, again, from council's perspective and mine, putting to this voter, it just happens to not be a checkbox for the town to check off when you're filing with WIPA, to have it go on for voter approval. Avoiding that is not our motivation. And it seems that our understanding is there's a process that's happening that would put this to that question as well. And that's not a bad thing. What would be a bad thing is losing that flexibility. And to your point, and again, full honesty, we've spent a lot of time with our attorneys, the county clerk, and the state in the last week or so. And this is unique territory and a statute that, with no disrespect to the maybe former majority leader, is not the best written document as from a clarity perspective. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, say there's a referendum on November 5th,
Yes.
say the town says no. What happened?
Well, honestly, the concern I have more is if the town says yes, what does that mean? But if it says no, again, we'll need an interpretation, but whether it means we can't use the WIPA process, and then we would go, if a sale were to be pursued, we would be challenging at that point.
We still have problems, so we have to deal with it.
Correct. Well, we both have problems to deal with, and another a sale attempt would be either a uniquely different enough presentation or application to the state to either start that process.
Looking like when you have to. When post referendum. The town says we do not have the will to privatize.
Mhm.
WIPA is either hanging out there or some are mothballed or whatever, but what? What is the council do? What is it done to?
What is it, you know, it's,
Leverage or lack of leverage or whatever.
I quite understood the question until we got to the leverage part. So I mean, at that point, if we
Well, I
could,
might have used the word
Okay.
leverage wrong, but what I mean is, what does it do to the, to the fact that it's still a really serious problem we have to deal with?
you're right.
Kind of what I'm asking is, what happens if we go through the process? And the town will expresses itself as, we're not gonna privatize.
Yeah.
Putting aside that I'm not sure we understand what would happen with the conversations there. What recourse do we have? Do you just start at ground zero? Do you just start it all over again? Can you start all over again? Given that we're in sort of an emergency situation, you know,
So,
I know it's a dumb question.
well, it's not a good question, and it's one that it is currently pending from us to the state. So I'm gonna be a little cagey in response here.
Yeah.
And I'll say, my day job is a land use attorney. So in the context of an application in my world, there, you go in, say you're denied, you wanna build a house or something like that. You can't just go back and ask for the same thing and ask for another question, you know, it has to be revisited. The application has to be different enough, explanation different enough to revisit it. So two scenarios.
But even though this is health and safety, so to speak.
Well, I'd like to think the state would be flexible in allowing us to reboot, and we've asked that to try again. Because the concern I have is how catastrophic to us exploring options this may be.
Yeah, that's what I'm at.
Yeah, if I thought it was fully catastrophic, I would be shouting. I do have major concerns, frankly, not that putting this to the voters is a bad idea in any way, but that by honestly, some people asking for things that perhaps aren't fully understood, that we would lose, at the end of the day, if the town were to lose options that are good things for us to explore, that doesn't just make me unhappy, that's our job, is to make sure we have those options to explore. Are we asking those questions to DEP because these are uncharted things?
Right.
Yes. Do we have some reassurances from them? Maybe. Would that not be a problem if there were no petitions filed? Yes, no problem. I mean, and I don't mean that in a cavalier way.
No.
But I.
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
And by no means in a way that I don't want this to be a decision for our community, whether it's through council publicly or through a voting mechanism. But the only concern I would have about anything is that if something happened to limit our flexibility in exploring options. And I'll be honest, I didn't really hear tonight an understanding of what is being asked of folks. I want to get, and we're working very hard to get to that clarity. I hope it is not the type of, I'm going to say disaster, that's not the right word, but some kind of option limiting action that would drastically or recklessly remove, you know, options that we should explore, maybe not execute on, but explore. And we're looking for more clarity on that. You know, to the petition organizers, we continue happy to talk to you and figure out an answer to this as you're thinking about filings. So, you know, that's where I'm at there. And again, as we started this, our goal, or my personal goal, and I think it's all of our goals, is to present to this community the widest range of options to have rates that are fair, to have a water system that is safe.
Totally.
And it's not just selling the system, and it's not just keeping the system. It's not just keeping it on this trajectory. It's a lot of things, and I am concerned with artificially taking anything off the table until at such a time that we have the information to evaluate. Is that necessarily happening Monday? I really hope not. I'm sorry, that's not a clean answer there.
No, but just, it needed sunshine, we needed to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's frustrating that, you would think we would get a definitive answer from the state of New Jersey.
It's almost first impression case, that's the thing.
And, you know,
Yeah.
so, I mean, we go for guidance where one would expect to get it, and. Anyway.
And honestly, it is helpful to hear, obviously, that the petition organizers believe that this action will put it on the ballot in November. And that is a clarifying statement where perhaps we can all be on the same page. That is very, if the state disagrees with that, I don't know, but to not have a nonprofit suing us to say it should be at a different date or something else should happen is very important to the clarity that we can provide our town. So that is a important piece for me. So,
Thank you.
I don't see any more online hands. But the button remains, pushable. We have, circling back to where we started, I'm sorry, it's distracting to have our own faces on the screen, and I'll try to remove that in a second, but it's hard to see up there. We usually have a second screen, and I moved it upstairs, and I'm sure there's no one watching upstairs, but we have figured out how to have overflow parking, more or less. So, for future meetings that we think are going to be big, we're working on solution. We've got people on Zoom, people here in person. We have chairs upstairs and a screen. These are hard things. And our commitment is to do them openly with as many people as we can cram into as many rooms and as many Zoom rooms as possible, with as many meetings as possible. And to have those meetings be not just advertised or explained, but, things like what we've done so far, whether, it was the May 13th special meeting postcard, whether it was putting the QR coded information on your, and I'm sorry, high water bills. That is our approach to this. And it will continue. And to those of us that we talked to tonight that have input, honestly, we all get a bajillion emails, so keep on us. We'll try to catch them all. But reach out to us so we can connect about some of the ideas that were discussed, so we can make sure that we are vetting those or that they're on the list of things that our professionals are looking at. That doesn't stop. It doesn't have to happen in a meeting. It can happen every other Wednesday at 1 o'clock here with Doug and myself. It happens at every one of our council meetings. We have a meeting on Thursday. We don't expect, I don't believe, to have any new, our agenda's out. There's no action item involving water at the meeting, but we do have dedicated at each meeting a time for comments or updates. Look, there may be, it's a no pun intended, very fluid situation. And, there may be an update between now and Thursday that we would, announce or talk about. But ultimately, I think if you're here tonight listening, yeah, you've got the latest and greatest from us about where we are and what we're thinking. But the comments and questions don't have to wait for these types of meetings. And we're going to try to do, this is a little different, a little bit more informal. I don't know, show of hands seemed a good way to do it. We'll try things like this and kind of evolve until we've got, we tried everything as far as that goes. David, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to say what I hope is obvious to everybody. I wanted to single out Councilman Mackey. We've been friends for a long time, but you've done an amazing amount of work in this area and digested it for us in a meaningful way. I want to thank you.
Well, I'm glad.
Incredible. It's super deep and complicated stuff, and you've been doing it with tremendous skill and articulate. It's just, you make it clear to us. I really appreciate it. This is complicated stuff.
Well, I try to understand and then I try to explain it. It's a two-stage process. Still trying to understand it, but.
Yeah, but thank you.
Well, and thank you all. It's, I don't know why someone who needs classes takes them off, but it is 10 o'clock and you guys spent your whole evening here and we're appreciative and that's what we love about Hopewell too. So thank you all.
We have